Oh, is that Storm Friday? Okay. We gotta hit the bread a little harder tomorrow. We got wiped out a couple days ago. We had a couple days ago. We got wiped out Portuguese.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll call the January 15th Select Board meeting to order. A couple of small changes to the agenda. We do not have minutes from August 21st. And I was thinking under public hearings number 2, we should just take a vote at the beginning to continue that to February 5th.
So moved.
Yep, second.
Can we do that?
Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Announcements.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just subbing for this evening until Libby gets here. Hockey game tonight. The Select Board meeting is being audio and video recorded. And just a reminder that town offices will be closed on January 20th in observance of Martin Luther King Day. So very easy announcements.
Thank you, Greg. Public comment. Are there any public comments this evening for something that is otherwise not on our agenda for discussion? I see David Gray coming to the mic.
Good evening, everyone. David Gray, Sewer Director. I just want to let everyone know that starting on Monday, we're starting our year 3 of the CMOM CCTV work. So the camera crew will be out on the road starting on Monday, and they're going to be doing about 130,000 linear feet this year of CCTV work and cleaning. So you'll see the trucks. It's going to be National Water Main who will be out there. So just to let you know.
Great. Thanks for letting us know. Any other public comments? Okay. Seeing none, I don't believe that there's any new business. Oh. Remind me what it was.
Do you want me to do it? You do it.
Sorry,
Okay.
DPW?
did you guys not go through it today? The DPW has one request to, for a noise bylaw waiver.
Oh, I'm
for the
sorry.
Washington
Yes, we
Francis
did.
Street intersection.
Yes, we did go through it.
So, I don't know if you're all aware, but there is a broken pipe there,
Yes,
and the
and
drainage
they
is
need
backing
to do
up.
it at night to fix it.
Correct, because we've
Sorry,
way too
there was
many.
too much going on today.
We have way too many house moves coming out of that route to do it during the day.
So Rob McNeil, DPW, we're just trying to work through this failing infrastructure while the design of the new intersection continues. So we're trying to find some windows between when the buses run through in their final route after 9 p.m., find a low tide that works. So we're going to try to do as much as we can during daylight hours at low tides, but to actually occupy and close the intersection down to do majority of this work is going to require some real scheduling. So right now, we're just looking for a waiver from the noise bylaw to give us the flexibility to do this work as necessary.
And Rob, when do you think the work would be done? In the next 2 weeks? Or
We have very, very short windows of opportunity. So right now we're looking for latitude to go probably through February, just in case.
So would that be the motion till like March 1st?
Sure.
I would make that motion to approve the noise waiver until March 1st.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Approval of payroll warrants and treasury warrants.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We don't have any pending contracts this evening. We do have some consent items, gift acceptances.
Motion to approve with letters of thanks.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next up, we have a public hearing for National Grid and Verizon to present planned upgrades to existing overhead distribution facilities between Candle Street and Milestone Road, L8 Distribution Reliability Project. I will open the public hearing, and I believe we're starting with a presentation from National Grid.
Thank you. Is this? Good evening. Thank you. My name is Marissa Pizzi. I am in-house counsel for National Grid. We have with us this evening several members of the project team, some of whom will be participating in the presentation this evening and others available to answer questions. And we also have with us a representative from Verizon. I first just want to say thank you to the board for scheduling this public hearing and inviting us to present this evening. I'll be starting off the presentation, and then I will be handing off to others on my team. So first, we are obviously here this evening to discuss National Grid's planned upgrades to its existing overhead distribution facilities, specifically along an approximately 1.5-mile route between Candle Street and Milestone Road. The poles along this route are jointly owned with Verizon, and the majority are in Verizon's pole set area. We'll be providing, as this presentation goes forward, and you'll see on the upcoming slides, we'll be providing additional details about the specific pole upgrades, the specific pole replacements and wire upgrades that we are planning. But I first just wanted to take a moment to provide a little bit of background regarding the history of this project and really what brings us here this evening. So I'm just going to here kind of quickly go through the next couple of slides. These are some of the key members from our project team, most of whom are here this evening. And on this next slide is just an overview of our agenda with the topics that we'll be running through as part of our presentation. So first, as I mentioned, is the history of this project. National Grid first engaged the town about installing a new distribution feeder back in 2017. The new feeder, which is referred to as the L8, which you see up there, was initially planned as an underground feeder. And as you can see from this slide, there have been numerous meetings with the town and public presentations regarding that underground option and various underground alternatives that were presented to us by the town. For many reasons, especially cost, timing, as well as constructability and engineering challenges, it was concluded that undergrounding the new feeder was not a feasible solution to address the island's reliability needs in the short term, specifically to address the need for increased capacity before summer 2020 peak load, when demand on island is at its highest. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about what that means in the upcoming slides. But in light of these obstacles with undergrounding the feeder, National Grid introduced its planned overhead proposal in October of 2018. And since that time, National Grid has participated in additional meetings with the town, public presentations, as well as a public information session to present the benefits of its overhead proposal as compared to the obstacles of the underground option. As the board may recall, at the board's July 24th meeting this past summer, underground alternatives were discussed at length, and the town's engineering consultant, Environmental Partners Group, presented at that meeting as well. Both then and in the draft report submitted to the board this evening, EPG concurs that undergrounding the L8 is not a feasible short-term solution, and recommends that the town pursue the more expeditious overhead option presented by National Grid in order to meet summer peak demands. So essentially, since that July 24th meeting, there have been a number of additional communications between the town, National Grid, and Verizon, primarily through council, to discuss National Grid's proposed overhead project and National Grid's and Verizon's plan to move that project forward as soon as possible. And as a result of those communications, National Grid and Verizon agreed to appear before the board for a public hearing this evening with notice to abutters. And so with that, I guess as a history and background, that's what brings us here this evening. So as I mentioned, again, what we are talking about here tonight is not a new route, and importantly, no new pole modifications are proposed. We are proposing modest upgrades to existing overhead facilities which have existed in this location for several decades. This slide, I don't know how well folks can see the map, but this slide provides an overview of the existing route and the existing facilities. These overhead facilities that we are talking about date back to the 1930s and 1940s and exist pursuant to grants of location from the town. National Grid and Verizon have maintained these wires and poles pursuant to these grants of location for several decades now. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Joe Cardinal, who is with many of you may know, is with our Community and Customer Management group to continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you, board, for having us here tonight. Wanted to go over the project description and need a little bit, as Marissa had already spoken to. It's an upgrade of existing facilities between Candle Street and Milestone Road. It's a 13.2 kV line feeder. It involved limited pole replacements and wire upgrades, and a few slides down in the presentation, you'll see the wire upgrades and the amount of poles. The scope is consistent with typical overhead maintenance operations that we've completed and ongoing on Nantucket. And we're anticipating the cost, I think, about $3.2 million when this project is completed. And of course, that is socialized over all Massachusetts ratepayers. It's not being borne solely by Nantucket ratepayers. The purpose of this is to increase the capacity on the east side of the island. And it's also to improve switching ability. And we also want to fully utilize excuse me, the Bunker Road battery system and generator by being able to backfeed down to the downtown if necessary. We want to reduce the potential for outages on other feeders. There's 3 feeders that are now reaching their rating, the L2, the L4, and the L7. This new L8 will take electric load off of those 3 feeders. Again, we're nearing the summer capacities. The wire could potentially fail and outages will result until repairs are completed. I've seen this happen in the past, and Joe Henry will jump on me if I don't see it correctly. During a very hot day, when the feeder becomes overloaded, the wire begins to thin out and it begins to sag. And when it sags, it'll come in contact with the wires below. And then obviously that'll cause it to burn and fall. And then immediately, when we have crews dispatched to the area, they'll call into dispatch, and dispatch will say, that feeder is overloaded. If you repair that wire and put it back up, it's going to burn back down again. So what would happen is the crews would sit there on the site until dispatch got back to them at some point when the load came down on the feeder, and there wasn't a fear of that happening again. And again, we just mentioned that there's 3 feeders that will be affected, and the load will come down on those 3 feeders when the L8 is completed. This is just a graph showing the demand growth on Nantucket. This is the overall growth for the entire island from 2008 to 2019, with a peak of 49.3 megawatts this past summer. And you can see it's obviously increasing quite rapidly. We did have a 2014 where the load came down for the summer, obviously a very cool summer. And here are the 3 feeders that we were talking about, showing how they're reaching their ratings, the L4, the L2, and the L7. And we're anticipating, as this graph keeps going up, that about 2.8% growth rate each year. Joe, you want to just a little bit on what ratings we're anticipating them to be at this summer?
Sure. Yeah, so that, what's shown there is last summer's ratings. You can see the red is the this is Joe Henry. You can see the red is the L2. That's the one we're mostly concerned about because it's 98% loaded last summer. Actually, one of the phases was 20 amps over the rating, so we're pushing that feeder already. Because there's three phases on a circuit, and the average is the rating I'm showing you there. So one phase is over the rating, one phase is below the rating. That's how we get the average there. But so for next summer, we're projecting the L2 to go to 106%. So that's the average. So one phase could be 110, 111%, because we can't get them perfectly balanced. So yeah, it's we're hitting that critical time here where, like Joe said, the wire's going to start to sag. You could hit other wires below it. They could hit each other because you have 3 wires. If they're all sagging, there's a lot of slack, and they can bang into each other and cause a fault. So it's also, that's just one wave that's a problem. It's also, you're pushing the circuit right to its limit. And a lot of times you find like the weak spot. There could be a bad connector. There could be some of the wire has nicks in it or it's corroded a little bit. It doesn't quite have the rating that we think it has. And we tend to find those spots first, and then those fail. And I have other things that I'm worried about also, because when it fails, all the feeders are so loaded up that we can't pick up any load on the other circuit. So you lose the circuit and everybody's out until we fix it, or have to wait till the load subsides.
Thank you. So I just wanted to go over the select pole replacements on the existing overhead road. There's 79 existing poles over the 1.5 mile route. 41 poles will be staying the same. We will not be changing them. We'll be replacing 38 poles, same locations as the existing poles, which means that we'll be utilizing the cut and kick method. The new pole will go into the same hole as the old pole. And I believe 34 of these pole replacements will be done by Verizon, and 4 of them will be done by National Grid. 9 of them will remain the same height, and 29 of them will be raised up an additional 5 feet. So what the chart below shows, there's 1 pole that will go from 35 to 40. There's 27 poles that will go from 40 to 45. And there's 1 pole that will go from 45 to 50.
Can I have a question about that? Did you guys work with sort of DPW and planning to figure out which poles need to be higher for house moves? Is that part of this? Was that considered?
No.
Okay, because that's something we always talk about. I don't know if this crosses any of the main paths, but if it needs to go 5 more feet, now would be the time to do that.
Fabio, is the 50-foot pole, a junction pole on a street corner, that would be helpful in?
No, that's a milestone road for the riser and recloser.
So none of these are
It's only going to help. We added 5 feet on most of the poles, and we can't go much higher than that. So 5 feet is 45 foot is our standard poles. 50s, we need special equipment to reach the poles, to actually work on the poles. So, yeah.
Well, I would like it, anyway, just as one member, I would like it to be looked at. There are certain routes that are used quite constantly, and then you guys have to get called in and lift them or disconnect and reconnect. And if it's, if we can go 5 feet higher now and make that easier, sort of at a couple of the main areas, this would be the time to do it. So anyway.
The historically, from my experience here, is the crossing on Milestone, that rotary, those poles are already raised as much, the lines are raised as much as they can be raised right now. And the remaining pole line is here downtown, and zigzagging to tiny streets. I don't think you can move houses through that. But no, we didn't look at that.
Okay.
We can certainly check with DPW if there are any on this route that potentially are utilized every time when there is a house move.
Yeah,
We can look at
just
that.
we know we've talked about it over the years. You can, yeah, so I would love to have that looked at. Thank you.
Picture of an example of a replacement pole. Actually, the second pole in the back is probably the better one. It shows the 5 feet difference in the height. Shows the fact that the new pole is going to be straighter. Thank you, Erica. The new pole is going to be straighter. It's not going to be leaning. The pole in the front shows you some of the construction work that will be undertaken to make sure that we're getting the phases away from existing houses. These replacement poles are going in so that we can meet our current federal electric standards, and it'll help us to provide the safety clearances that we need. And also the replacement poles, because they have a little bit of a wider base to them, they're less susceptible to damage, particularly during windstorms. The last bullet, exploring the process for faster removal of old poles. Obviously, this is an issue. It's an issue in every single town. It's an issue for every single project. We've had multiple calls internally with Verizon, and we've also spoken with Comcast. We want to get this project done and the double poles removed as quickly as possible. It'll be something that we'll be coordinating and that we'll be watching and making sure that as soon as one utility is finished with their work, the other utility is ready to go to do any transfer work that they have to do. The existing overhead route, the wire upgrades, the red section of the overhead route is the aerial cable upgrade, where we'll be replacing 3 vertically oriented wires on the pole, and we'll be using one slightly thicker singular wire, and the next slide shows that. The other wire upgrades in the blue area, we'll be doing same thing with the aerial cable. We'll be replacing the 3 wires to bundle it to appear as one, and the top 3 wires we'll be replacing, and they'll be upgraded version. So when we're done, the number of electric wires will be reduced on many of these new poles. And here is a picture. The picture on the left that's circled is an existing condition right now on Nantucket, the 3 wires shown in that vertical position. When the L8 is completed, it'll look like that, one black thicker wire, and we'll remove the 3 wires. Traffic management plan, obviously very important because of the roads, the small roads, not wide. Obviously, that's going to be something that we're going to need to work with on a continuous basis with the town officials, with the police, with the fire department. I'm assuming, obviously, that at all times there will be police details out there on the job with us on probably either end of where we're working. We always want to maintain 1 lane of travel on the 2-lane roads. There could be possible for temporary closures on some of the smaller roads while we're doing the work. But obviously, with the police detail out there with us, anybody that needs to get in or get out of their drive will be able to. And contractor on the job will obviously be aware that this is an important issue. Proposed timeline. Just a couple of things that we show up there. We show how, the engineering, the construction planning that's already gone into place. Happy to say that the Bunker Road is complete, the new generator and the battery storage are in service out there. We're looking at construction and installation, if we were able to start immediately, of finishing up the L8 feeder by the end of June, so that it would be in service for the months of July and August, where obviously we see the highest peak demand of load out on Nantucket. And then construction closeout work would take obviously another couple of months before we were completed 100% with the job. Outreach, we have our stakeholder relations department. Danielle is here. She's waiting to go. She's willing to do whatever it takes, door to door. When we're in a particular area, one-on-one meetings, we will be active in the newspapers, on email, and wherever you need us to get information out to you, and so that you have all the proper information. Here's some of the ways that you can connect with us. Danielle, can you tell us on the phone number, if somebody is to leave a message there, how quickly we would return the call?
Within 24 hours.
Okay. Yeah, 24 hours. If a message is left on the numbers there, we will make sure that we get back in touch with you within 24 hours. So that basically is the end of the formal presentation. If I may, before I turn it back to the board, I had put together some notes as I was thinking about the project, and just wanted to go off script for just a couple of minutes, if that's okay. Because what I want to make sure is that we are properly, we, National Grid, are getting our message out about the importance of this project to the town of Nantucket. I've been doing this job now for just over 30 years. The first 15 or 20 years, I spent a lot of time in front of select boards, meetings with town managers, DPW directors, police and fire chiefs, and I heard a lot of negative reviews about our service. Your reliability is poor. Why do we have low voltage in the summer? Why do we have brownouts? Why are we being scared with the potential for blackouts? Why does it take so long to restore power? Your tree trimming program is non-existent. I have branches and wires everywhere. How are you planning for the future? Can your system handle our planned economic growth? What are you doing as a company to combat global warming, sea level rise, carbon emissions? Obviously, these concerns were being heard throughout the system, throughout our territory, and it was my job, along with my fellow managers, to be the advocate for the cities and towns and bring it back, and to get our executives to listen. It took a while, I will admit, but the last 10 years or so, the tide has changed. We've listened, we heard, we've acted. Now we can't even keep up with the amount of projects that we've got going on. We have a project management team that gets involved now to oversee these projects because we have so much going on. We're building new substations. We're refurbishing existing substations. We're installing new feeders. We're upgrading existing feeders. We're installing new switches in the substations and on the feeders so we can do field switching to re-energize customers quickly during an outage. We have completely restructured how we trim trees and remove hazard trees, increasing our budget so as to minimize tree-related outages. We are raising all of our equipment in substations to eliminate flooding issues with sea level increases. We have installed the battery storage unit to reduce emissions and also delaying the possibility of a third cable and the third cable costs that come along with it. We are spending about $90 million in capital projects on Nantucket alone to achieve what I just mentioned. This L8 is one small but very important part of our plan on Nantucket. This is not only one new feeder, but alleviates electric loads on 3 other feeders. I mentioned the L2, the L4, the L7. There's a lot of customers that are served off of those feeders. It also allows us to fully utilize the battery storage system. For the last 2 summers, while construction was going on at Bunker Road, we brought diesel gen sets over to the island in case we had a major cable fault. 2 years ago, we had them hooked up at Bunker Road, ready to go. Last summer, we left them at Candle Street. Not a good way to say we are reducing carbon emissions, but it was necessary to make sure we could support the island while we installed the units at Bunker Road. Ideally, we don't want to do that anymore, and hopefully we don't have to do that anymore. We want Bunker Road fully operational, and we want the new feeder installed so we can utilize everything the way that it was properly intended. So we ask you tonight to approve the project, allow us to start immediately so we can complete it by the end of June. If there are concerns with individual poles, let's work to solve them on a one-by-one basis so as not to delay the project any further. We can propose weekly, bi-weekly meetings with one of our designates with DPW. We can certainly come back in the summer or early fall and address the board and go over any issues that might have come up. Again, I hope we properly explain the importance of this project, and I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
I just have one question along those lines. As you're thinking about future upgrades, is there any consideration for what a shift towards electric vehicles, buses, appliances, all those kinds of things that sort of globally people are talking about a shift to? Does that impact the 2.8% growth rate and how you consider future projects?
I don't think we include that in the numbers. Joe, is that anticipated growth in your numbers?
So that 2.8, it was really close to 3 if you look at the whole chart. That was the historical growth from the past. We do have a forecasting group that goes through and takes all that stuff into consideration, and they give us a 1 year, like worst case, like 1 in 20 summer for next year. That's what our projection is. And after that, they give us a growth rate moving forward. That growth rate moving forward is, for this latest one, was 1.9% after 2020. So we have a whole group that looks at the demographics, looks at the economy, looks at all the, solar and everything.
How finally do they sort that? Like, is that Nantucket's number, or is that the average of the
Nantucket
state?
has their own number. We have like southeastern Mass, Nantucket, western Mass, northern Mass. So it's pretty fine tuned.
They fine-tune it.
Yeah.
And is it mostly taking into consideration new homes, new business, sort of new buildings that are adding to the load?
Yeah, it does that, but also looks at solar and batteries and things like that too. So it's trying to look at everything really. Because even in some areas we had negative growth because they just think it's going to be more solar than growth. Mm-hmm. So.
And just 2 questions that I think came up in July. One was, there isn't an L9, or are there any other sort of imminent future upgrades of this scale?
Not for a while anyways. This Candle Street substation's maxed out with the 8 feeders. The only time we would have another feeder is when we get the 3rd cable. We'd put a new transformer and then more distribution circuits from there.
Okay. And then my last question was, I think at the last meeting we were talking about some ADA compliance with the sidewalks. Did we rectify that with some of the new poles or the pole placement?
You want to talk to the ones that you looked at, Fabio?
Sure. So the game plan was to replace the poles on existing locations. So the ADA compliance issue came up. I walked the routes a couple of times with the contract engineer, Ziad, and we addressed the poles. We're going to adjust the poles to meet the ADA compliance for the poles we are replacing. The poles that we're not replacing, if they are or not, they stay where they are.
Okay.
So.
Great. Thank you.
I just have a follow-up question on that. I know a couple of the other questions were about improving some of the sidewalks and if there were poles in the way. When you guys were walking through, did you see any that you guys could move, or is everything going to stay in exactly the same spot?
Yes, so it's extremely tricky to do that because we have multiple utilities on a pole and multiple risers, and that's what we're trying to avoid in order to get this project built and meet the deadlines. Just replace the pole to be able to handle the new thicker wire on the pole and give us proper clearance on the same location. And if there's any movement later, need to move a pole, we can address those poles later and take surveys and do all that stuff. But honestly, most of the sidewalks have issues, and it would be impossible to meet every single thing, move the pole behind the sidewalk like it's ideal because the houses are really close to the property lines. So where the poles are now, it was designed this way in the past to keep the line straight on the pole and not have angles to make the pole lean, or add a support pole across the street or add anchors on private property. So we're trying to keep that line the same way as it is now. But the poles we are replacing, we are going to address ADA compliance. So.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you. Next up, we have Ziad Carey on behalf of the town, who's evaluated this project.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Ziad Carey. I am an engineer with Environmental Partners Group. We've been working with the town. We worked on the force main repair and assessment in 2018, and we've been involved with the L8 review with National Grid. Today's agenda, the background, I think National Grid did discuss this at length. I don't think we need to, I'll make that pretty quick. The goal here today is to basically summarize what we did for peer reviews. To date, we did a total of 3 peer reviews and a comprehensive report. The report is on the town website. It's about 384 pages. Pretty comprehensive, I think includes all the reviews that we've done to date with recommendations. We could discuss the alternative ductline alignment. We did the underground route that was proposed initially by National Grid in 2017. August of 2019, the planning board did propose their own underground route, and we also, EP, our company, came up with 3 conceptual routes. We kind of put them all together and we compared them, and we'll talk about that a little further in the presentation. We'll talk briefly about conclusions and recommendations and future planning for any underground utilities. Again, like I said early on, the scope and the purpose, Joe and the team from NGrid articulated this in detail. The alternatives proposed by National Grid from the get-go, there was an initial underground option that was presented in 2017. It was dismissed pretty quickly because of cost implications and duration for construction. Then we came back and we discussed a deep underground where the duct line would be installed below the existing town infrastructure utilities. And obviously that was also dismissed by them simply because the issues working at greater depth and putting manholes 10 to 15 feet deep below grade. We then looked into the overhead option about a year ago today. When this was presented, we looked at it, we reviewed it, and we focused on the impacts to town utilities and then also the restoration associated with it, in addition to ADA compliant issues. One option was presented by, conceptual option was presented by National Grid, was the horizontal directional drilling, and that one also was dismissed rather quickly simply because of the impact and the permit requirements to go through the harbor and the cost associated with that option. A bit of a timeline. Again, August 2017, NGrid submits the underground option. This is the set of plan that we reviewed. We provided the first peer review comment on there. We did a site walkthrough with Rob McNeil from DPW on January 25th, 2019 to look at the overhead option. We submitted the peer review comments for that option on March 11th. We presented along with them on July 24th before this board, and we also attended the public info session on the 26th. What's not on this slide, on December 9, we provided the peer review comments for the planning board route, and then of course we provided a draft report, comprehensive report that includes everything that we just discussed. It's currently in the draft form on the town website. The initial underground proposal by NGrid, we focused on constructability, how that was impacting the town infrastructure. The concept had these massive vaults, 11 by 14 feet, change of direction manholes, and their main duct line, which is typically installed about 30 inches below grade, and it's about 3 feet wide by about 23 inches tall. And that runs along the whole alignment. We quantified the impact on utilities, what would need to be relocated or replaced for that matter. And at the time, I think we made some assumptions simply because the database, the GIS database for the town was not available at the time. So we made some assumptions based on experience and based on what our knowledge of the existing utilities within the town right away.
What would have been different if you had had access to that?
We'll talk about that further because the report obviously allows for that. We knew where the water and sewer is and where the drain infrastructure is located, and at the proposed depth for the underground duct bank, what would be impacted at that level. So either it's a replacement or repair. Peer review number 2, we simply looked at the overhead option. Again, this was presented when we walked the site about a year ago, last January. The focus was on ADA compliant issues. The sidewalk currently, as they exist today, they're not in compliance. So most of the poles do have the required distance from the back of the pole to the edge of the sidewalk. However, the one thing that's not in compliance, which is the offset requirement from the face of the curb to the face of the pole, and that is pretty much consistent throughout the entire alignment. We also talked about the license requirements, the air rights. It's all summarized in the reports, and the impact of the infrastructure. Basically, it's on the surface. It's the restoration of the sidewalk, the brickwork, some paving, and perhaps some granite curbing. And we provided the cost estimate associated with this option that was presented by National Grid. In August, the planning board came up with a very good route option for the underground, from point A to point B. The option utilized the property owned by the town at 37 Washington Street, and then also gets up to Sparks Ave where the right-of-way increases. It's fairly wide. You could put a lot of utilities in there. We looked at that. We also looked at the impact of that route on the existing utilities, and we put a cost estimate, conceptual cost estimate associated with this. And we compared that to the proposal that was provided by National Grid for the same underground route. We were asked to, in addition to the review for the overhead, the initial underground route by National Grid and the proposed route by the planning board, we were asked to look into 3 different routes and put them all together and then compare costs and then impacts to the infrastructure. Can they be done? The alignment, how long is it? What would be impacted? How long would it take to implement? And then the planning level cost estimate associated with each of these options. As you can see from this figure, all the 5 options are shown on this map here. The yellow one, that was the initial one proposed by National Grid. The planning board follows the red line. We looked into one outside the box, the one in green line, using the salt marsh by ways of trenchless technology, trying to get away from all the utilities that are located within the right of way. And then we followed the planning board route on Sparks Avenue, and they all obviously end up on Milestone Road. We then put all these options together, National Grid, the planning board, and our 3 options. We compared lengths. The shortest one that was proposed by National Grid was about 8,400 linear feet, and the one I just mentioned, going on the salt marsh, that would be the longest one at 9,300 linear feet. The green here, it tells you it's an optimal, it's definitely doable, less impacts. And then if it's red, if it's coded red, that means there's a lot of impact associated with it and a lot of heartburn to be able to implement it. We also looked at length, environmental impacts, vital areas, whether it's a police station, fire station, schools, and then the flood zone or the town-owned properties, residential areas, narrow streets, and so on and so forth, and commercial properties. So how we came up with, how did we quantify these costs? So we took every segment, every street, segment by segment, using the town GIS database, and we assessed the existing utilities and the likelihood of these utilities to be damaged during construction. So if it's 50% likelihood to be damaged, there's a 50% cost associated with that particular item. Most of the costs, obviously, it's related to restoration, because restoration is a big piece. We then put all these options together, and if you look at the cost from the National Grid option at 22.4 million all the way up to 24.2. So going from point A to point B, it's plus or minus about 1.6 miles. The longest one was about 1.8 miles. This will give you an average about $2,600 or to $2,500 per linear foot of work, and the work would include the installation of the infrastructure for National Grid, replacement of the utilities, and then perform the restoration. The one common thing here, what we carried was $1,500 per foot to implement the infrastructure to accommodate the National Grid duct line. So just to bring this up one more time, again, the L8 is not it's an express feeder. It's not intended to get rid of the existing poles. It's just going to run from point A to point B. It doesn't really have any services to homes, just a straight line. If the intent is to get rid of the poles and pull the wires from the poles all the way underground, this would require a lot more than an express feeder. This would require transformers, and based on discussions with Fabio and National Grid, these transformers would be required almost every 5 to 10 houses. And based on what we have, the amount of properties and the amount of houses that we have along that proposed alignment, you would probably need 13 to 26 of these transformers. And the transformers are they would have to be mounted on. We'll show the picture a little further down here. And again, this is a picture that came from their website. The top one shows almost a 10 by 10. The transformer itself is about 5 by 5. It has to be on a concrete pad, and it's going to have bollards to be able to protect it. So given the alignment that we have, it's going to be a little bit difficult to find locations for these transformers. And then the private property limitation, if there was a place to put them on town-owned property and then run wires to each particular home, that's one option. But then again, the next slide will show where the town-owned property versus private properties are located. One thing we also looked at, the mature trees along some of the alignments. So if you're digging about 5 or 10 feet adjacent to a tree, you disturb the route, most likely this tree is not going to survive. The blue parcels, color parcels, those are town-owned properties. The red is the alignment that was proposed by a National Grid, and then everything else is privately owned. The implementation time, based on the schedule that was presented by National Grid, actually the old presentation showed 180 days for the underground. Based on our experience and what we know for existing utilities, doing 1.6 miles probably going to require about a year to year and a half of work. 180 days is very ambitious, and I don't think it's doable within 180 days. The overhead wires, I think it was discussed now, if they start in February, they're looking at a completion date of June, so that that's a little bit more than 90 days. if you were to put the duct line at a greater depth, even if this was doable, you're talking about replacing all the infrastructure, gas, water, sewer, and drain, put the under the duct line beneath everything else, and then rebuild all the water, sewer, and drain above the deep duct bank. From the 2018, I'm sure all of you remember this force main rupture here that happened on downtown. So this is some of the experiences that we've had. If you were to, and I talked about it last time on the 24th of July, we had a visual as to what, if you're putting a structure in the ground about 7 or 10 feet deep, you'd have to, if you're in the downtown, you're in the groundwater table. And to be able to dewater that, you have to implement something. This is a vacuum wall point system. So you'd have to set it in advance, develop it, let it run for a couple days, lower the groundwater table, excavate, then sheet and lag, and then put the structure in. The picture on the left, also the same thing, shows a bunch of different utilities downtown. Anywhere you go downtown, you're going to have the same exact condition. Same thing here on South Beach. That was the sewer force main. You get the electrical line, the sewer force main, the drain line below it, the gravity sewer. You could see the picture on the left, pipes going in each and every direction. And the top photo, this was the vault that was proposed on the National Grid 2017 plan set, 14 by 11. A little bit about climate resiliency. This is a slide where, based on the NOAA records from 2040 to 2010, whether it's an intermediate or low, the climate change and the rise in sea level, you could go from 0.85 feet to as high as 2.49 feet by 2040. So the figure down here shows anything in light blue. This would be in the 2 foot would correspond to 2 foot sea level rise, and then in the dark blue, hopefully we don't get to that point, that would be 8 foot sea level rise. So anything that would have to be implemented downtown below grade would have to be above the floodplain. So if you have a structure that's going below grade, it would have to be encapsulated. The duct bank would have to be encased in concrete, and then any transformer would have to be about a foot above the flood elevation.
What numbers are you using, for the 100-year? Are you using?
We're not using a 100-year storm, but we're using the
2010
projection. Exactly, right.
Yeah, which number of those are you using?
Well, I just mentioned the 0.85, which is the low, and then a 2.49. So we said 2040. If we were to only look at 2040, if we, it would be between 0.85 and then 2.49 for extreme.
Right.
So that said, with the timing, obviously they articulated this and they talked about the need moving forward. And then obviously the overhead wire is not it's the cheapest option, but then also it's most expeditious option that could be done in about 4 to 5 months perhaps. The suggestion and for moving forward in terms of condition of approvals, we discussed overhead now and then underground later following studies and proper planning. So last time we discussed looking at a particular alignment and see if you could maybe perhaps dedicate a sidewalk to put in the duct line below grade, and then everything else could be you upgrade the utilities, and then see if that model works. Maybe the rest of them could be done that way. Again, we talked about for the overhead, the pole location. We talked about the not just simply the ADA compliant issues, but then also the offset from the face of the curb, and then. it's a challenging construction project. We recommend that a third party be retained to look after the town's interest, restoration, ADA issues, communication, traffic management, all of the above. If the need, we discussed also stake and property lines to understand if the back of the sidewalk is actually the back of the property line, and that could be only done at pole locations. That would be quick and easy to do. If there's ever a need to do a subsurface exploration, if the soil changed, the groundwater became an issue, and then maybe some borings would be beneficial if required. And of course, a traffic management plan to the town, fire, police, and then the DPW. If there is an appetite to do an island-wide study, I think they have 7 or 8 feeders on the island. Would be nice to understand how they run, where they go, where they end, where they initiate, or where they end. So proper planning could be done. And then I think there should be an effort with National Grid to coordinate all that with the anything that's anticipated in terms of upgrades, water, sewer, and anything from the town's infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The last picture, one thing, and I think it was your number 2. The last picture showing sort of the bank of, on the right, showing the bank of wires or.
And that's what we talked about last time, I think. Whether it's a sidewalk, like the planning board, for instance, proposed that route on Sparks Ave. And my initial thought, and it's in the report, there is a sidewalk that's not in great shape, and there's a grass strip. Right. Maybe then you could dedicate either the grass strip or the sidewalk for the underground, for the National Grid underground.
Right. And if we're going to do future planning, I think we should be doing it sooner rather than later and thinking about those things, so we aren't here at the last minute where the poles are gonna burn up and drop down into the and kill everybody. I mean, we've got to get ahead of it a little bit. And number 1, and number 2, I think we're sort of set on. One of the things that strikes me is we're set on. Well, this is where it is, so this is where it has to be. But I'm wondering if we looked at it and said, if we did it again for these for the future planning, where could we do it that doesn't have all these impacts? I liked your number 2 where you went on a route that didn't impact everything. So I would not want to constrain ourselves to, we have to do it the way it's been done and going the routes it's been on, because maybe there's a better way to bring those main lines from A to B that would be easier for everybody. So I hope that when we're thinking about it more that way. And one of my other concerns, I'm sure we'll talk about this, I have a time. My time is up.
Oh, amber! It's an amber alert.
Yeah, and then the other thing.
Everything started from.
The other thought is transformers. I think that don't assume that the private property owners won't give space for those, or there's not another way to do that, because most of the owners are in favor of getting rid of the poles. They're unsightly, they're in the way, you can't walk on the sidewalks. So I think a lot of the private people would give that, or we have powers to take. So when we do that planning, we should be thinking about that. We should be thinking about what's the best way to do it, and I think we would get support on that. Mm-hmm. And then the only question I kind of had was if, I'm looking at this and they're talking about closeout, but closeout still, we have to make sure we can influence that so it happens in a timely manner and that the various utilities work with each other. And it seems to me the poles will still be there. Verizon and Comcast, if Comcast is on any of them, still have to finish the job. And so we have to think, and I don't have the answer, but how do we, have an agreement that ensures that everybody does it? And we may not want them doing it July and August. That we can't have a truck in one lane of traffic, any of those streets in July or August. So, so if National Grid ends in June, that's great, but we may not want them doing their work until, I'm just thinking out loud, until October. So there's things like that, the timing of this. Because if I've got the first presentation correct, there's still a fair amount of work to do after June. right? Yeah, so we have to think about that timing too. It's not done in June.
And in the interest of timing, I guess the questions for National Grid, the conditions that were outlined in the presentation, and I think some additional conditions that are in our packet and were sent over to you from council, is that's something that, if we're going to take a vote tonight, I think we're probably thinking towards having some additional memorandum of understanding that incorporates all of those parameters. And I'd love to just hear your reaction to that before I open it up to the public.
Sorry. Can I also add that I think there were two that Zad had, the staking of property lines and submission of a traffic management plan that I'm not sure were in there, but I think should be added.
Oh, yeah, right here.
Sorry, right there. Sure, thank you. So I think these are the suggested conditions that were just mentioned, and we did, a couple of hours before this evening's hearing, receive some suggested conditions from town council, which we've looked at but haven't had an opportunity to fully digest. We do have, I guess I'll address these first. I think the list of conditions that were sent over by town council, we do have some serious concerns about the breadth and scope of those conditions as it pertains to this project. Starting with these, I think it's important to, I guess, emphasize and bear in mind that this project has a very limited scope. We are replacing limited poles in their existing locations. I think, as Fabio mentioned earlier, we are more than willing to work with the town if there are concerns about specific poles in specific locations. But for the poles that are existing, we have rights to be in that location, and we're not changing the location. Certainly for the poles that we are replacing, as Fabio mentioned, we will meet ADA compliance, but again, those poles are going back in the same hole. So I'm not sure I see the need for a survey. I'm not sure what, I guess, a survey for those locations would accomplish if we're putting them back in the same holes. Typically, we would perform a survey for if we were doing a new pole alignment or an entirely new underground route, as we did for the original plan. And I think the same issue with the offset that was mentioned for the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board regulations. That wasn't something that we had previously seen in any of the materials that were submitted. But again, these are pre-existing poles, and so if we were changing the location of the poles, I think I could see we might trigger whether it would be ADA or Massachusetts Actual Access Board, but we're not altering the path of access that is there. Obviously, it sounds like it's an existing non-compliance, but these are pre-existing poles. And I think there are space limitations from what I've heard in terms of our ability to even meet those setbacks if we wanted to. Again, I hope that we've demonstrated a willingness to work with the town, and we would continue to do that. And if there's things we can do going forward to address some of these pole locations, I think we would be more than happy to do that. The concern is tying any of those actions, I guess, to as a precondition to us completing this project, obviously would delay and put the project certainly at risk for completion. We've already cut into our construction timeline, and so we're already at the point where we're cutting it pretty close. I think as far as number 4 and 5, we would expect. I think the only permits we'll need are DPW.
Road opening permit for the underground section to get to the riser pole.
And as far as removal of the double poles, we obviously that's something that we fully intend to be working with the other utilities to, as Joe said, to expedite that as much as possible. So I don't, again, that's something we fully intend to do. My concern with making it a condition, again, I guess, of approval is that I don't know we certainly can't agree on an outside time limit to do that. There's actually a case that speaks to this very issue. The the statute with respect to double poles. I know there's a 90-day period in there, but it's not actually enforceable by municipalities. And I think the sort of reasoning behind that is because oftentimes it's not the utility that's the holdup with the removal. So we want to do everything we can to work with the town to move things forward, but this is a very limited scope project, and I think our hope would be that the town would allow this project to move forward, to start construction right away, and then to the extent that there are things and concerns that the town would like us to address and to work with you on outside of the, not on a separate timeline, we'd be willing to do that. I don't have the list of conditions in front of me that were sent over by town council. I don't know if there's a way to present them, and I'm happy to go.
While you're looking for them, the double pole issue, I believe, is sort of what I was talking about earlier. And we've got a couple places where we've had double poles, and maybe they're gone now, but they were there for, quite a long time. And so, so we have a lot of complaints about it, and then we ask something about it, and what we always are told is, well, that's not us, that's the other utility. It wasn't my utility, it was the other utility. Oh, we're trying to work together. So I guess my question is, what would you suggest if you were in our situation? How do we ensure that the utilities work together in a timely manner? What conditions would you put in if you were in my seat to ensure that you guys all work together?
Well, I think Joe talked about what we can do to try to move that process. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, but I guess how would we ensure that happens for this project?
Understood. We have, between the utilities, between National Grid, Verizon, Comcast, and if the town has any fire alarm wires on the poles, we have a system called Engines, NJUNS. So as soon as, in a project like this, if Verizon is installing the pole, as soon as the pole is installed, they update Engines. And it says, okay, next to go, which would come to National Grid. Okay, so the pole is in National Grid, you've got to transfer your wires from old pole to new pole. And then as soon as we're done, we go into Engines and it goes to the next, needs to be transferred. A lot of times, and I've seen it happen, the clerks in the office, it doesn't happen. The paperwork doesn't get through. It doesn't get on the engine system. We don't know the pole is out there until we get a call from the select board or the town manager's office at DPW. Hey, this pole has been sitting out there. Can you get rid of it? And then we go out and take a look at it and see who needs to transfer. It'll be important for us on a project like this to make sure that Engines is updated as soon as possible. Obviously, we're going to have a lot of eyes on this project with Steve Holgate and Brendan O'Neill down here on a daily basis, working with our contractor and Verizon on it, so they're going to know double poles installed. Time for you to do your transfer work. So we've got to keep the engines up. We've got to keep the eyes on it through the whole project so that we can get everything transferred and get those double poles out.
I had a quick question. The recommendation number 3, retain and pay for construction administration and oversight by a third party. I'm wondering if that's a role that could be part of making sure that coordination happens afterwards, so it's not just you that has to chase the other utilities. But if that's something that National Grid would be amenable to as part of the MOU, but also potentially making sure that those double poles come out as quickly as possible.
So I think that was, trying to look for it on this list, also a requirement that was included in, I thought I saw in here about a third, you're talking about like a third-party monitor. Yeah. So I think, as I touched on earlier, I mean, our concern with some of these conditions, and, I think that kind of, the one you just mentioned maybe is similar to number 1 in terms of imposing additional costs and fees on National Grid. There is a lot of case law that talks about the state policy in favor of ensuring that electric service is uniform, meaning uniformity throughout the state and cost efficient. And so, the courts have repeatedly recognized that and sort of struck down regulations or conditions that attempt to impose additional cost burdens on the utility. We're not trying to certainly shirk any be cooperative and we want to do what we can. But we are a regulated utility. This is not our money, it's customer money. And so there are limitations when it comes to costs of what we can agree to do. Particularly with respect to, I see number one includes legal and consultant review. I don't know if we're talking about, I know the town's consultants has been engaged since, for 2 years now. So that's not an insignificant cost. I don't think number two, indemnification, I don't think we'd have a problem with that. The next one down, as far as permits, I think we're just talking again about street opening permits. Some of these other, I'm not sure what is meant by some of the other language in here, and I don't know if there'd be an opportunity to sort of discuss the specific wording of the conditions with town council, but I'm not sure about safety of proximate structures. I'm not sure if there would be the need for any street repair or resurfacing as a result of this work. And I don't believe there'd be any permits required for any wiring or connections. As far as the next one, as far as unused or vacant conduit capacity, I have a question as to, since this is an overhead project, what that's intended to apply to. And then going down the list, the double poles again, I don't think that's one we could not agree to be bound by a 90-day requirement. Again, we would do everything we can to expedite that process, but and as I mentioned, it's actually not enforceable by municipalities, and I don't say that to mean that we don't want to meet that goal. That's certainly our objective, but I don't think that's a condition we could agree to. And the reimbursement of the cost for the town appointed LA project representative, I think that goes with number one as far as cost limitations. The 18-inch setback, again, I think we could work to address specific pole concerns. I'd be curious, I guess, to know what the trigger is here for that, since we're not moving pole locations. Again, these are existing poles going back in the same hole, so there shouldn't be any trigger for meeting setbacks for this project. But we're certainly willing to address these pole locations on a case-by-case basis. I think the waiver from the MAAB, again, I think that would be inapplicable. And I guess the last one, I'm not really sure what that, when it talks about federal interstate approvals. That would just be a question maybe for council. I'm not sure what that one is asking.
I was going to ask if we should have them speak.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and through you to the members. So I'm happy to go through this. These are conceptual in nature. This is not legalese, so everything you see here is somewhat malleable. These were developed in consultation with our office and town administration and various departments, and are just simply suggestions. All of these are within the scope of the project, which are permissive in our opinion. With any vote taken tonight. Several of these are standard, and many municipalities throughout the Commonwealth do require these as conditions for grants of location and similar proceedings. Reimbursement of costs, I know this is very broadly written. That could be, we had included legal and consultation review, but if there are particular issues with that, or that sounds like that's one of the bigger issues I think I heard from NGRID, but if there are particular issues with respect to any particular recommendation, if that's even something that this board wishes to approve, these are simply some conditions that were developed. There may be additional conditions you place within the scope, but I think this is a reasonable set of conditions. It may not be that all of these are even selected for inclusion in any vote taken this evening. This is just to help steer this conversation and address some of the serious issues that have come up during our internal deliberations. I think going back to what the chair had mentioned about a MOU is probably a good idea. And if I were to make a recommendation to advance this, I would, in my opinion, suggest that the board consider, if you are going to place any one or more of these conditions, that you premise any approval on an MOU having been executed pursuant to the authority of town council working with the town manager to address the concepts. I don't think I want this to be an open exchange, and as I think Marissa indicated earlier, it's been a very positive back and forth to get us to this point, and I want us to continue down that path. So I think doing it in that manner gets us to the end zone, so to speak. Hopefully. I think I heard there are certain no's, and I think if we tenor the vote in a fashion to provide flexibility, I think we can hopefully get it. I'm trying to avoid what their bigger concern is building additional process. And I leave it to the board to decide how to proceed. Clearly, that's not my say. But in order to proceed with the project, hit the timing considerations that were outlined earlier this meeting, providing us the ability to work with them in consultation with the town manager's office to address these conditions. So to the extent you approve them tonight, it was probably the most effective means by which to get us to an end.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Okay. I'd like to open it up to public. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here who wanted to speak on this issue tonight? Okay. Board, any more questions, comments?
I have one more question.
Yes.
I know that you guys have been working on this for 2 years, and now we're kind of at the point where we have to make a decision quickly. With the L8 feeder, how long will that keep us going before we kind of hit this brick wall again? Is there an estimate?
I'm sorry, before...
Like, I know we've put off putting a third cable in, and we can estimate how long till we need that, but is there an idea of how long until we max out the L8 feeder?
I think they said that we can't do another feeder until the third cable goes in.
Yeah, this is basically the,
just come to the mic.
The last feeder that we would be able to install out of the Candle Street substation. After that, it would be possibility of, if there was a third cable at some point someday, another substation, maybe at another location in the island, so that we didn't have to deal with the intricacies of coming out of the downtown area.
Okay. I was just wondering, should we start planning now for the next one?
Our planning group, and Joe can attest to this, they're certainly looking at it. We want to see the results from the battery storage system, how that is delaying. The initial numbers were it could delay 15 years of us looking at the cable, which could really push us out. If we can fully utilize the battery to its capacity and push out a third cable, maybe something else will come along that we won't need to install a substation. We won't need to bring a third cable over. We don't know what's going to come down the road. But again, if we can get the full use out of the battery storage, then we can start evaluating the future.
And I think we want to start evaluating getting as much as we can in terms of utilities underground, but it's going to be a very long process. And that's why it does require getting started soon and working with National Grid on that.
Yeah, and that's obviously that's part of our responsibility as the utility. Any city or town that is looking at underground is for us to get involved, myself, our engineering group, our planning, our local engineering, to sit down and help the town design a system that works for everybody.
Just one other kind of comment question. I was trying to work through, as you were presenting, that this is going to help in the summer, and what are some of the benefits to the year-round population? So this will help alleviate some of the other feeders, which you said are around the hospital. So is that going to help the Mid-Island, where a lot of year-round people live?
Yeah, so we'll be gaining a lot of capacity for the whole, especially for the eastern side of the island. And part of other plans I have is, once I have this capacity, I was going to, put switches at open points where we can do remote switching and pick up customers quickly when there's faults, kind of like self-healing. We have a fault over here, and the other feeder picks it up within a minute. So it will help all year long. Have this capacity, we can, get customers back on much faster.
Like in Tom Nevers, Sconset?
Yes, I have a plan to. It's called like an automatic flip-flop scheme. So if we lose one feed, it's gonna flop sconset in, to the other feeder. So, but I can't do any of that without the capacity. I can't, because I'd overload everything. So I'm waiting for this capacity. And I have these other projects lined up to put these switches on there.
Tom Nevers has been one of the worst spots for power outages in more recent years.
Yeah, and this L8 is actually going to feed Tom Nevers normally, and it's going to be a direct shot out there. So it should, because we're adding this circuit, you're splitting up the main line, which gives you less chance of having a fault on that main line. So it's just a less chance of them having an outage, because we're going directly out to Milestone Road and feeding out to Sconset. So it should give better reliability.
The service, it's way better. It's more consistent, way better than it was 30, 40 years ago. I could count on once a week or so.
Yeah.
We would be out of, I'd be running the bread oven and all of a sudden it stops. And you lose, 100 loaves of bread because, you can't get the stuff out of the oven.
Right.
So, it's a lot better than it was, knock on wood. Rarely does that happen now. So we have, they've done a lot of positive things.
I remember filling the bathtub with water all the time because the power might go out.
So there is projects, not new feeders, but there are other projects to make these ties and maybe reconnect some wires. They're not as a large project like this L8, but some other stuff just so we can have these more reliable feeders and they'll be able to flop to each other and, really keep most of the customers going.
And there's infrastructure on this as well, like the Sconset water tower
There's
is
what
powered by this?
Yeah.
Or it will be. I mean, this will be
Yes,
backup for that.
Right. Well, the L8 will feed out to Sconset, so it will feed that area, and I'll have say something happens at the beginning of the L8, fault, it'll switch over to the other circuit automatically and keep it going.
I think we're just trying to illustrate a little bit how this impacts our year-round population and our services, rather than sort of the concept that this is a problem because of all of the really large houses that have been built for summer people. That's why the line of questioning.
I know it's hard to build up all these automatic schemes if I don't have the capacity. I might need to have it for the summer, but the people who live year-round are going to benefit from it as well.
That's a bad argument to make, though, because if we hadn't built as much as we've had over the last 20 years, we'd probably have 6 of these. We don't 6 lines, not 8. So I don't think it has.
I just felt like it was important.
I understand. I understand why we would say that, but it's part of what we're dealing with is the impacts of what's we built more homes over the past 30 years than we did in the first 300, and these are the growing pains that we're dealing with, and we shouldn't and there's a lot of catch up and a lot of sort of planning ahead, for some of this. I'm not. One of the comments was 18 inches for the sidewalks, and there's some places where it should be right on the edge of the road, and other places it should be on the other side. Or we want to get as much actual sidewalk as we can get, and so it isn't necessarily. I don't think there's not a prescriptive like 18 inches from the curb, because that'll stick it right in the middle of the sidewalk, and we don't have. We're trying to get some of our sidewalks back, and so. On a case-by-case basis, what I think about it is on a case-by-case basis is there's 3 or 4 of these poles that could be moved 10 or 15 inches one way or the other that would improve, sort of public access and walkability. I would hope that we would do that, and that's just a general, and I understand why you guys want to go right back in the same pole, in the same hole, because, architecture, because you end up with ADA issues and everything else. And I don't think that we are, having that argument. I don't think we're having the argument of, well, you're putting a slightly bigger pole in, you're worsening ADA, therefore you have to come up to code. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, we could make that argument, but I don't think that's a legal argument or something we want to do. I think what we want to do is say, how do we take advantage of what's happening to make, public access and things better? How can we improve it even just a little bit? We know we have to do this. We have to do it probably on the route you've given. I doubt that it'll be on the other route, although I like the number 2 better, but, I think we're probably gonna do that. But how do we, on a pole-by-pole basis, make, walkability for everybody a little bit better? That would be kind of one of my main goals. And how do we get it done on time? Does Verizon and Comcast, you guys all promise to do it as quick as possible? What does that mean? How do we ensure that we're not here 3 years from now with one of them saying they couldn't hire anybody, or we're too busy, or whatever, So how do we make sure that it gets moved along?
I just want to make a couple comments. First, thanking the planning board for putting the effort into looking at alternate routes that looked very well thought out, and I think it also really highlighted how much we do need to start planning for anything underground now, between the costs and the decisions that need to be made. So I think I echo other board members, if we're going to really consider underground, we have to start now. Looking through some of the MOU, sort of the concepts, I agree with Matt. I think the speed not conflicting with summer traffic, and getting the double poles out as quickly as possible, whatever that takes. And then just a little bit lower, Erica, sorry, on the screen, going back to the future planning, I think the language about installations in the future going underground, so that National Grid and public is put on notice, I think, sort of subsequent to the appropriate planning. I do think we should be talking about this now and make sure that we are on notice. I think there's a lot of decisions, so I wouldn't say it's guaranteed, but most likely things will be underground. But I would also, I would be okay with the sort of an approval based on a negotiation of an MOU with National Grid by town admin and town council, incorporating these concepts in. Some of them seem more sort of ticking boxes, like some of the permitting, and then getting to where we can on the other ones, that seeing which ones we can add in that are reasonable.
If I could just make one additional comment on that point, I support the having an MOU. I mean, there's certainly I think a lot that needs to, I think a thought back and forth that needs to go into that, and I'm wondering if the board would consider a vote that would allow construction to proceed sort of imminently. I mean, we are ready to go, and I think everyone has heard sort of the need for this project to move forward as quickly as possible. And my concern is that if we end up in protracted sort of discussions over this, that's just going to continue to kick the can down the road. Would the board consider a vote to allow construction to move forward, conditioned on allow the construction to move forward, but sort of have a separate, I guess, requirement that we negotiate on these subjects to arrive at a mutually agreeable MOU. This isn't, we are in somewhat of a sort of unique posture here. This isn't a formal petition, so I don't think that would be out of the ordinary to
Could we put
to
a
do
deadline on it?
for the MOU. Are you saying put a deadline?
On getting it signed, like say we allow construction to commence, but it would cease if the MOU is not signed within 30 days, or something along those lines.
I don't have I don't think we'd have an objection to putting a deadline on the MOU. I would be concerned about it tying it to ceasing construction, because then obviously, I mean, that's not good for the town. It's not really good for anybody. I don't think anybody disagrees that this is an essential public service and that it needs to get done. And so I not trying to minimize the town's concern over any of these issues, and certainly we want to address them. And some of these, I think, as we've heard, when it comes to space constraints in the sidewalk, I think are sort of separate and apart from this project, and something we do need to talk about. I just would like to suggest maybe sort of, if we can, having that not be tied to construction. It just seems that we're all in agreement that this project needs to move forward as soon as possible. And obviously there have been delays along the way through no one's particular fault, but I could see this turning into 2 weeks, a month, 2 months. and in the meantime, project is delayed.
Yeah, that's why I'd kind of like to have a deadline on getting the MOU done. I mean, I think that we're going to be reasonable on these conditions based on what's already been said. But I'm going to look to council for a recommendation on how to handle this. I mean, if the MOU is not tied to anything, it's not really worth anything.
So, in light of that information, I think we're getting that much closer. So I think what would maybe be reasonable is to, if there is an approval of the project, to proceed in good faith with National Grid to prepare an MOU that corresponds substantially with the form of the concepts advanced. We heard tonight that NGrid was comfortable with several of these. Some of these are driven by law. And, to the extent there are, I'm trying to think of the best term of art here, gray areas that need to be worked out. I think we could proceed in good faith to accommodate legitimate concerns in an MOU, address it as much as we can, so long as it's consistent with what's on the board tonight. I mean, if we condition, it's entirely up to you as the board as to how to structure that. We can help structure the language for you, but I think that a deadline makes sense. In my opinion, but I think, and obviously if they're going to construct at risk during that time, that's one thing, but I think we can structure any approval that accommodates that process in a reasonable time frame and grants us the flexibility to accommodate concerns and address that in the MOU and just conduct that in a timely, good faith manner as we've been doing to date with them. I don't know if that's somewhat esoteric or if that's, but I think that, I think I'm comfortable proceeding in good faith, negotiating with them and just subjecting the vote to achieving an MOU that's substantially in conformance with these concepts. If these are those that you agree with, it's entirely up to you.
Okay.
Only other question, are there other utilities, Verizon or Comcast on these polls, and are they represented here tonight? Yeah. Comcast or Verizon, anybody? Yeah, Verizon, will you come up and I just want to.
We do have someone from Verizon here.
Okay, great. Yeah, I would just like to know, everything we've talked about, are you guys on board? Is this going to work, or?
Ellen Cummings, Verizon. Yeah, we've been working with the NGrid team. We understand how important this project is, and we do. We have the set in many of these poles that will need to be replaced so they can proceed with the project.
Okay, and so what we've talked about timing-wise and getting the double poles out and everything else, you guys can commit to doing that in a timely manner?
As they said, I mean, we're not in total control. I mean, Comcast, I mean, I'm looking at the double pole list now, and that there's even fire alarm on some double poles right now. And so there's an order that we need to go on the poles when we transfer for that, as you know. So that's out of the control. And I was sitting back there, and I agree with what you're saying as far as, do you want anyone doing double pole work in Nantucket during your peak tourist season? No, I mean, personally, I think the project is going to get to a point, you may want it to cease because you don't want anyone out there, and then you want it to pick up again in, say, October.
Right, but we want to know that it's scheduled in October and that it's not, you guys aren't scheduled somewhere else.
So it would mean, I mean, I can't just say, yes, I'm scheduled for October, because it may not be it depends where we stop. The poles go in, NGrid gets moved on to the new poles, and Comcast starts with some of them, or fire alarm for everyone stops at that point. So then it would be, I mean, there would be discussions, yes, okay, we need to pick up, the town would like us to pick back up in October. So this is the engine's report. This is where everyone on these polls stands. are you ready to go? I mean, what we'd like to do, for example, is come in, and once everyone else is done, we'll come in and blitz then. And that pretty much makes sense for any municipality as far as how you want to see it proceed.
Right, right. Is there, so, sir, this is just a thought, is our MOU with, different entities? Do we have an MOU with, how does that work in these situations? So we've got National Grid, we've got Verizon. I didn't think that we had any more, fire alarms. I thought most of the fire alarms are through the phone now.
Even if the fire alarm is on there, sir, and it may not be maybe abandoned, basically, it's still the responsibility for them to remove it because no one touches anyone else. But it could be very well be abandoned.
Yeah, I think the last couple.
Excuse me, it is. It's not active, and there's very little of it.
Right. So that's not.
So they basically just need and they may not be on any of those poles.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So I guess that's a legal question too. Is our MOU National Grid and Verizon and Comcast? How do we handle that? What's that? Who else would it be?
So there are several users of the poles and owners of the poles. So you have Verizon, you have Extenet, as I think Erica just mentioned, which is your Crown Castle, Comcast cable, other utilities. But I think for simplicity's sake, with respect to conditions like those you see here, so long as they're consistent along that vein, I think the MOU doesn't have to be overly complicated with tri-party and quad-party agreements. There may be one or two limited instances where maybe a Verizon, as the owner of the pole, may have to sign on to a change, or we'd have to think about that. But I think we can maintain this as somewhat of a simple exercise. I don't think we have to overcomplicate it.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask for a point of clarification, and I think I heard Attorney Fierce say this. We would be amenable to, I think, the process he's outlined as far as negotiation of an MOU with, whatever that outside date might be of 30 days, provided that we could proceed with construction in the interim. I did just want to clarify, and I do think I heard him say earlier that I understand that this is sort of the conceptual topics that I guess will be a starting point, if you will, for our discussions. But to clarify that there is some flexibility in that. I mean, obviously there were some of these that we don't feel like, at least as worded, that we could comply or agree with, but that there is enough flexibility in the negotiations that the board isn't going to be expecting these sets of conditions in an MOU.
I think we heard your concerns and that no one was having a overly negative reaction to that. I'm going to close the public hearing at this point. What? I did. Yeah. I mean, unless someone wants to say anything before I close it. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I think that we can move to a vote. Are we going to have the board sign the MOU, or is the town manager going to be authorized to sign the MOU?
I'd authorize the town manager. I think that's fine.
Okay, that's fine. Does somebody want to make a motion?
I'd make a motion to approve. Yep. I'd make a motion to approve the commencement of work in conjunction with the development of an MOU to be negotiated by National Grid, Town Council, Town Manager within the next 30 days, and to be signed by Town Manager.
I'll second for discussion. The one comment I had was about removing within 90 days the double poles, and just trying to figure out if there's a way, the ones along Washington Street and in the core downtown, like if those could be a little bit quicker than the ones more closer to Milestone and the Rotary. I don't know if that can be worked into the project.
I kind of heard that 90 days, they're not going to be able to commit to that. It's going to probably be more some language of as expeditiously as possible. And maybe we could prioritize those in the discussion.
And then not,
but I think it
in the summer.
depends. I think it depends on the progression of things, unfortunately. Is that fair? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and noting that again, that 90 days may fall in July and August, so it may not be ideal. I think what really was highlighted to me, the recommendation that we may not be able to include, but I actually think it's the most important, is that third-party oversight. I think ideally we would have a project manager on our behalf that is working to get all of those double poles, because it's not really in the interest of the utilities to make it happen as quickly as we want it. So I understand that may not be possible, but I think it's something in future for consideration.
Well, and having oversight to make sure that the offices tell the next person.
Right.
It's sort of, I understand, but.
Yeah, exactly.
And to make sure that the timing suits our seasons.
Okay. We have a pretty good course of action here. We'll go to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. The next item on our agenda is a presentation in regard to Harbor Place update, and I just want to take a 2-minute break.
Yeah, I used to slide the low seat over to Bruce Miller every time. Like, there you go. I'm like,
Well,
and
when
they
I
always,
first sat
someone
down,
always pushes back here, and every night I put it there, and he'd sit down and go, oh, and he'd like, okay.
Well, when I first sat down, my feet were touching the ground, so I went over a little bit, and it was like,
No, that's totally fine. I
Oh, I was just texting you. Yeah, well, I think what's going to happen.
Town of Quincy used to hold it every quarter, and they were just vicious. You'd go to them and almost want to wear a flak jacket, but they got results. Well, I had surgery Friday, so it'll be 6 weeks. Oh no. I'm a little off right now. It's like having a double toothache trying to focus. I'm on both sides of this. I care about the town, but I get the predicament they're in.
Remind me, I won't. How long are you?
Actually, Brian's vacation.
That's not much.
Interestingly, look, right around budget, right around town meeting.
Town manager's already
You're on my schedule. I have my fifth on
provided.
Monday.
Actually, Erica, she agreed to it and authorized it under one condition: that I am 100% available for her during those 12
Sheila
days.
wouldn't come get me.
Which I readily gladly agreed to. I said, "Look, I'll make myself 100% available. I can't promise you what shape I'll be in at that time, but I will."
And then I had this, and I got one more to go, so.
So you want to avoid me during that time.
Hi.
How are you, sir?
Good, you?
I'm good.
Good. Hopefully. Don't yawn.
We're going to reconvene now. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Truig. I'm here with Dave Fredericks. Some of you may know Dave we're going to try to team tag this a little bit. I had surgery. He said he has a sufficient amount of Percocet in him that he can probably say most anything tonight. So he's going to be handling the clicker. So we'll see where we go. We'll be very brief tonight, given what you've sort of just been through. But as you know, Dave, for many years with National Grid, I'm here on behalf of NIR and Winthrop. It is a unique thing to talk about tonight. It's sort of the downtown properties and the idea of having three property owners who sort of control the site that's up on the screen, and having that opportunity, about 5 acres, to sort of have them together to talk about what we could do with the town. Certainly the changes that have happened over the past several years, especially associated with transportation, changes at Highline. We have, and I think we all sort of agree that there's a transportation issue that has to be addressed, as an infrastructure issue that has to be addressed, and I think the decommissioning of the tanks, which will happen over time now with the new tank farm, really provides a unique opportunity for us to try to bring the town, the landowners together to try to rethink what this should be. And I think everybody knows many months ago, actually over a year ago, there was a commission formed, and there was a lot of dialogue for a period of time that sort of, due to elections and other things, stopped happening sort of the spring of last year, where this opportunity was focused on issues of intermodal, what could happen out at the site in vehicle, bicycle, bus transportation, street grid. And this site, I think, as everybody knows, has been the subject to a lot of studies, Wilkes Square being one of the more well-known ones, but the idea of just sort of infrastructure. Again, we'll be very brief, but we thought just a quick agenda on site history, a little bit about the existing conditions. We had termed this sort of in the working group a little bit, calling it Harbor Place. No magic to that, but talk a little bit about it. Redeveloping a portion of the waterfront, what the opportunity is, and a little bit about next steps. Before we go to next steps, I think the two things that we could take out of tonight, I think would be very important. One, sort of the town's desire and willingness to sort of commit the resources to look at infrastructure and transportation in this area. And then its willingness to sort of work with, the entire group to sort of put a group of people together, including town staff, to see how we could move this forward. And that town staff may be third-party professionals, just to sort of understand transportation, understand infrastructure. If we could achieve sort of that movement over the next several months, we think we could have something to try to, have something moving forward. So just very briefly, we won't. I think everybody knows what the site history, the sort of the industrial nature of this area, and this just gives you some of the photos. We think they're really interesting. Gives you a sense of when people think about what was downtown, that's what was actually here in this area.
So John, as you look at these, if people were looking at them, the one to my left was done in 1938. The next one was 1958. The next one was 1968. And so you kind of see it kind of evolved. The power company started on that property in 1901 and then added larger generation in 1938. And then, as you can see, had coal gasification. And in the 50s, you can see how it all spread out. And in the late 60s, Sherburne, or Mr. Beinecke, and all of the changes he made, he consolidated the tank farm and had changed the site and brought in what we see as the parking lot in New Wales Street. It just helps people kind of visually understand that.
We made the comment, it's really not a new story. It's a story that has been talked about with the town for many years, certainly heightened by the transportation needs downtown. Wilkes Square was one of the key examples. And as I said, really the decommissioning of the tank farm gives us this opportunity. This is the site. If you think about it, it's really has three owners in it. National Grid, obviously Winthrop Properties in the middle, and then a combination of Winthrop and NIR as you head out to Straight Wharf. And that's sort of about a 5.2 acre site in the downtown. As I mentioned, certainly the shifts that we've had in transportation, the focus on the High Line, some of the decline that we've had in air travel, it really does make, and everybody's experienced this, and I won't go through these points, but you start talking about the sidewalks, they're too narrow, the roads are too congested, people sit in the Stop and Shop parking lot and block all the spaces or otherwise park there overnight. They wait for the unloading and the loading. There really isn't adequate queuing for taxis, there isn't adequate queuing for shuttles, there isn't good bicycle movement. It really does focus on what we need to do, community-wide as we look at what's going on here in the downtown. So for people's orientation, we sort of did, we're not very creative, we sort of did 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1 being really the parking lot, 2 the Stop and Shop grocery store, 3 where the tank farm is today, 4 the substation, and 5 with the parking lot. And that gives you, if you sort of ring it by the streets of Commercial, New Whale, and out to Straight and over, you find your 5.2 acres total. So we mentioned the word Harbor Place. What really is it? We think, and this is sometimes overused, but truly this is. It's a generational opportunity to look at the waterfront, to think about a blend of what could be there, not what's there today, but residential, retail, and restaurants. Recognizing that there are long-term leases and there are commitments that are there today that will have to be recognized, but to really think about the planning that we should do as we have this surge related to the High Line, where you have a lot of the transportation issues. How do we create an opportunity here? Now, when you start thinking about redevelopment, you start thinking about, could we widen the streets? Could we get the sidewalks different? Could we create a street grid? Could we widen these areas? Could we create view sheds? It is that opportunity now to start to think and plan about that. May not happen immediately as time goes on, because again, we have leases and we have commitments, but over time, we have a real sense of, can we figure out, rather than land just being privately developed by 3 different landowners, can you think about, well, but if we were able to widen this, take this strip of land, make it available for public access, we could really do something interesting from a public standpoint for transportation.
One of the things I tell people to think about, because they've said to me, why Harbor Place? And it almost, sometimes I wish we hadn't named it. If you think about, and I think you'll hear more about this, there's you're gonna see that we're talking about an acre and a half of property that gets developed. Much of the other land ends up in either road widenings or ends up in some operational uses for National Grid or land that the town controls. And so it's so much more than Harbor Place. It is about the roads, the streets, the land the town may have, the opportunities to have some things for the future or to change some of the things that they might want to try to address in the short term.
when we start about and think about the redeveloping, and we're going to show you a site plan in a minute, and it's a very crude one. It's really more a lotting plan, but it shows you a little bit and start thinking about where the vehicle queuing could be, where you might have shuttle and pickup, where you might have a taxi loop, where you could have personal pickup, where you could have pedestrian movement, how we could think about the buses. Some of that came from the work that was done by Desmond last year and thinking about how we could make that transportation sort of hub, the transportation center work. But all of these, whether it's bicycle, peds, whether it's vehicles, whatever it is, are all sort of looking at it. As Dave mentioned, and we'll show it to you, and we heard this very much from the town working group early on. If you aren't talking about transportation and infrastructure, then if you're not starting there, then we're really not starting with the right project, because it's less about what you can develop because there's a limited amount of land you can develop. It's more about sort of getting this area right moving forward. This is the site plan that I mentioned, and this gives you a sense of outlined in the green of where the entire area, and I'm going to start from the bottom and just quickly move up. As you start, and this is labeled sort of National Grid has to reserve certain area. They want to reserve certain areas, obviously where they have operations, but also in the events of emergency where they have to bring in equipment and the like. So what you sort of see in the bottom lot is something that would remain for obvious reasons about the importance of it. We were able to identify on the left-hand side Lot H, and that was an area that in our discussions with National Grid could be conveyed to the town for a transportation center, for an area to be used for a transportation center, for bus opportunities, to really identify what that could be. It's about a 3/4 of an acre piece that could be there. And then as you move forward in the site, you start to see, well, here's the Stop and Shop lot, here's the tank farm, here's a couple of additional lots that could be identified. Now, whether that's for development, whether those all eventually in a long-term scheme would get put together, but you can also see there's opportunities to create not only the 4 roads that surround us, but also roads through the site. Now, where they would exactly be, how they would be developed over time. But that's the idea of what we might do. And then as you get out to Straight Wharf, would it be appropriate to build something out on Straight Wharf in the edge of the parking lot if you have the appropriate street frontage and design? And again, in thinking about it, at that point, the Stop and Shop might be gone and there might not be something there. But again, thinking about what could we do to rethink how people move around the site. We did some sort of circles and arrows because we don't want to get into, oh, well, I wouldn't put the shuttle bus here or I wouldn't put the taxi there. This is just to identify the type of thinking that we have to do to identify where's that sidewalk, where should you have queuing, where should you have taxis, is there a way to dedicate a certain areas for shuttles, how do you bring people in off the High Line, where do they go? Those are the things that we think when you combine that with appropriate widenings, making land available to be able to do that, you could really rethink what this part of downtown is.
You look at what Rob's team did on Straight Wharf on the part that is across from the Stop and Shop parking lot, right? And so we were with some people today on a completely different topic, and somehow this came up. And they talked about getting off the boat a month or so ago with some really big bags because they had gone someplace special, and they had gone with 2 big bags. They didn't go with something they could carry, and how they could get down that sidewalk and how they could manage their luggage for the first time. And the minute they turn the corner, start heading towards Washington Street, it becomes difficult. If you could imagine Commercial Street, not wider, so vehicles could go through there, and an 8-foot sidewalk with the right kind of situations, allowing commercial vehicles to make those corners safely. All of those things become real if we can sit down and work out a plan that's in common. New Whale can offer queuing for taxis or for pickup and drop off. Straight Wharf can have queuing on one side and it can have parking on the other if we widen it. The goal is to get Straight Wharf to be 8 to 10 feet wider, so it looks a little bit more like, and not quite as wide, but similar to Main Street, and it has parking and queuing on both sides, with the traffic flowing down the middle with wider sidewalks so that it can handle the human traffic. The details of how to do that are not something we've done. We've tried to make space in a plan to allow the town the ability to work on those kinds of solutions.
When you sort of think about all these things of Harbor Place, and we label it the unique opportunity, but to take a look at what was done with Wilkes Square and some of the other studies, and how do you incorporate them? How do you deal with the transportation? How do you deal with the, as Dave mentioned, the roads and the sidewalks? How can we make the connections and also key view sheds? One of the comments that was made rightfully was we want to be sure that any view that's down Main Street and out to the water is maintained, and that is thought about as you would look at this over time. The opportunity to provide land to the town at a no-cost basis in the downtown for transportation improvements, we think is a critical piece of this. As Dave mentioned, it's sort of here on this slide, that sort of from a privatization standpoint, from retail and housing redevelopment, you probably have about 1.5 acres on the waterfront that you could look at. And you also have to keep the land available for grid. For the operation. So that just sort of, we have some constraints about what we can do, but we didn't want to pass on the opportunity when we had 3 landowners working together with the town to at least have the dialogue about how to move this forward.
I think our big concern tonight is to get some buy-in on what are the right next steps.
We had put in a short list here. I mean, the idea of some funding for the select board and the town staff to sort of investigate some of these issues, whether they be infrastructure, transportation, planning. The idea of having some public forums and meetings to sort of review what the scope would be. Developing some type of a development agreement if we're going to be talking about conveyance of land and widenings. How would that all work? Related to that, is there zoning that would be there? This is in the old RC zone, which is not common anymore in Nantucket, but should that be put into a CDT zone? What does it mean from infrastructure standpoint? What is the things that we've just mentioned in widening and queuing and sidewalk? What does that all mean, and where should it happen? And are there other utility infrastructure? And then the conveyance part of it, whether it be from National Grid for the transportation intermodal center, or it's land to make these widenings and other infrastructure improvements happen. So as I mentioned in the beginning, if the 2 things we can sort of take away is, Dave said buy-in, we're looking for, does the town want to commit resources to this? Does it value it as an opportunity so that we could move forward? We certainly do, but it's certainly your decision. So I think that's it. Thank you.
So we're here for questions.
So we have already added this to the budget for this coming town meeting. So I think that we were all on board with that, just to start with number 1.
Last week we committed $150,000 to go to town meeting and ask for that. That's to be used to hopefully move this forward. And it's for consultants and for things that the town needs to do, roads, infrastructure, sea level rise, resiliency, harbor pump out, all the issues that we've discussed in our work group, being able to put some real numbers around those and some understanding on those. So
good.
And how a transportation hub might be laid out, and what kind of pieces would be a part of it.
I know that, I'm going to say something that John's probably going to twinge, in which I hadn't shown up after.
Remember, did I tell you he was on various medications?
But I think people, at the beginning of these discussions, one of the things that happened was we spent a lot of time talking about the word parking garage. And I think people lost what was really, we were trying to talk about a bigger picture of transportation center. I don't think any of us thought that the town had to commit to a parking garage. I think there were studies that indicated that might add value to the town. I think we welcome the town doing a thorough review and coming back with some forward-thinking solutions that help transportation. Some are the road widenings, but some are going to be the use of that property. And I think it's important, I know, for National Grid that if they participate, that we're doing something real and something that feels like it's generational, not just simple. So just, as we go through that, I'll be pushing that message, because I think that's a big piece of property they're offering that can really help us as a community.
And that was an important part in our sort of internal work group discussions, that we could, to not be tied to having to move forward a parking garage specifically, right. But there may be things that are more in line with our actual strategic plan and transportation goals of trying to move people more away from the single occupancy automobile.
I think as well, in terms of looking bigger picture, I think understanding the opportunities for improved infrastructure and transportation and meeting some of our transportation goals is key. But I also think that looking at this site in terms of coastal resiliency, and it's something that has come up in some of our discussions, I think that being on the harbor, there's a lot of vertical surfaces, hard surfaces, impervious surface that are going to be added. And I think, at least at the start, looking outside the box to see how, as this develops, one of the town's goals is to improve our resiliency. So I think above and beyond the transportation goals, I think there are other opportunities for this to be a significant project.
I would tell you, I think we agree. I would say early on, we found a half a dozen things that we knew we'd have to address, and that was certainly one of them. So we look forward to bringing some ideas to the table.
Are there any questions from the public? Comments? I mean, this is a very initial presentation. I think we'll do something in a little bit more detail, hopefully in March before town meeting. And the goal would be to get the kind of information that we need to potentially bring something more substantial forward in the fall.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think we'll need a lot of public outreach before town meeting.
For even this initial ask of the money for infrastructure and transportation goals?
I think it would be helpful for people to know what they're voting on initially.
Yeah, that's why I think a little bit more detailed presentation. We talked about some things in our work group to try and address some of the concerns we've already heard, but we're hoping with this presentation to hear from the public, other concerns and questions that they might have in relation to the redevelopment of this whole area.
And my concern would just be that if that does go forward, and we do have the consultant, it already feels a little bit tight to have their input plus 2 and 3 before a potential fall meeting. So I think there is a lot to get done, and I think understanding the value to the town is going to be essential to those public forums and anything that comes after that. So I think it does have to move. That's a fairly tight timeline.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Okay, next up is continued review of 2020 annual town meeting warrant articles.
Okay, so this is when things get fast and furious with the warrant, and it is changing daily. Since your last meeting, we have an actual draft warrant. So I thought that what we could do is just sort of scan through it, and as we go, let you know to the extent that we can what's really changed. So
is this in one of the packets? 'Cause it's not, okay.
It came by.
It's like it's not in the complete version.
Was it in the addendum? No, because we worked on it late, like 4 o'clock today. So you haven't seen this yet, but back up a bit, Erica. So I have been giving you the outlines. I think you had outline number 4 last week, and all of these articles are listed in the outline. These are just the actual wording. So all at the beginning here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, stop at 9 for a second. Those are all annual articles. 9 is an annual article. 10 is an annual article. However, what we've added in here is that last phrase there. There one or more amounts to be raised and appropriated, maybe contingent upon Prop 2.5 capital outlay exclusion ballot question. And those would be capital projects, which we're going to review subsequent to this review, but that I'm just pointing out that language. Then we've got these standalone capital items that you've talked about already: Newtown Road transportation, reconstruction of Lovers Lane, Amelia Drive and Waite Drive improvements, Children's Beach stormwater pump station improvements. 15 would be the override for Our Island Home. 16, 17, 18, just sort of skim through these until I see something. These are all annual articles. 22, by the way, the county budget, I think, is coming before you at your meeting on the 29th, and then it'll go to FinCom, acting as the county, whatever they're called, also county budget finance, whatever, review committee. 23, 24, 25, those are all annual. 26 and 27 and 28, I think, and 27 are sort of new, but we would be putting money into those this year. 28 is the article that we talked about amending a little. We already established a special stabilization fund for substance abuse prevention efforts into which revenue from the marijuana tax will go. And we talked recently about adding mental health programs to the purposes for appropriation from that fund. So that is what has been done. This has been reviewed by town council. 29 is the Harbor Place professional services item that we just talked about. 30 is the land bank financing article. There's still some stuff in here that needs to be changed a bit. 31 and 32, I believe, are the annual CPC citizen articles. 33 and 34 are citizen articles, and with regard to 33 and 34, neither of those are worked into any budget at this point, and so FYI. 35 is just citizen article, same with 36, 37, 38. 39 through, I think, something like 60 something, one or two, are all zoning, both planning board sponsored and citizen sponsored. Stop at that one for just a second. This is the cannabis advisory article that is under review with town council now, and I think there was a phone call scheduled shortly with them. Okay, I think there might be two of those zoning articles for cannabis. Two? Do you guys think? Or just one? Okay. So skim down to like the 60s, if you can. So again, these are just all citizen and planning board sponsored. And planning board has started its hearing, yes, tomorrow on zoning hearings. Yeah, a little more. 60, 62, keep going. 63 is it's citizen. And I'm saying these numbers, but the numbers might be a little off, and they may or may not change as we go forward. 64, 65, I believe, are both citizen articles. And there's a lot of discussion continuing at FinCom about citizen articles. 66 is citizen. 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, all citizen. 72 is the town-sponsored article to change the name of the Board of Selectmen to Select Board. You already know about that one. 73 you already know about. Okay, 74 we've been working on this one. This is a bylaw amendment for stormwater, which will authorize the establishment eventually of regulations once this is adopted. So town council has prepared it, and it is still under a bit of review by some of the departments, Public Works and Natural Resources, Health, and I think I sent it to the water company. So it's still under a little bit of review. Was there any policy issue, John, that we needed to bring forward to the board, or did that all get kind of worked out? Yeah, okay. So that is something that was asked for, and that is in now. 75, you've seen, this is the town-sponsored amendments to the plastics ban. 76, just FYI, I spoke with the citizen sponsor today, John and I did, to this article, and he is considering whether or not our article might meet his purposes. It's pretty long. Okay, 77 is 78, 79, 80. I think those are all citizen. 81 is citizen. 82 citizen. 83 citizen. 84 citizen. 85 citizen. Okay, this unnumbered one. This was the Historical Commission. I think I heard last week that the preference might be to move this to a fall town meeting. Town council has prepared has put it in some amount of shape to be put on the warrant. However, I would really caution you that it has not been reviewed by town departments for whether or not there are any unintended consequences here, and we will not have time to get at that before next week's meeting. 86, 80, 86, 87, these are all sewer district map changes that came forward from planning, which I believe have already been reviewed with you. That's unnumbered right now. There's some of this got put in late. That's right, you talked about that last week. And all of these sewer district map changes are under review with our internal group, and they're going to be looking at all the criteria, and you'll have a public hearing in February on those. 94.
But when do we have to vote on those as a board?
Before town meeting. It's sometime in February. It's
All right, so we can do it then, okay.
Yeah. I think you usually, at that public hearing, say if you're going to.
When's the last day we can put a comment on the warrant?
The comments are scheduled for, I think, your meeting on March 3rd. March 3rd.
So we'll get those prior, because I think those comments,
yeah.
those should be in. And
Yeah.
some of the other, I think some of these others are pretty important, and we should be thinking about commenting on them.
Yeah,
So-
you definitely start thinking about that
Yeah.
now. 94, you know about. 90, these are some Mass General Law acceptances. 95, you know about. 96, we talked about last week. Now we're getting into home rule petitions. 97, okay, 97. We have talked about this one, dedicating a portion of the local room occupancy tax revenue for specific things. So town council has prepared it. There are a few policy questions here. However, Brian and I talked about it earlier in the week, and I think we are feeling a little like, again, we want to make sure there are no unintended consequences with this. And so same with the WIF, the Water Improvement Infrastructure Fund. We talked about that last week. We're not going to go forward with that at the annual town meeting. And the idea would be to get a little bit of a work group together with maybe people from FinCom, a couple people from the board, and maybe some others to really sort through what are we trying to do, and let's make sure we're not going to hurt ourselves going forward with dedicating to something that we're not quite sure about right now. As the chair has pointed out, we don't even have a full year yet of the revenue coming in. So this could certainly be a fall issue, with, in the interim between now and then, taking a look at what we would want to recommend the amount from room occupancy be dedicated to, and for what specifically. So I would recommend, I guess, now that we actually take this out of the annual town meeting warrant, but keep it on right now for the special with this work group to weigh in. Okay.
I'm fine with that. I think
Okay.
And it's also, you think about it, it's easier, it's a lot harder to take something away. It's a lot easier to give something than to take it away later.
Yeah.
If you say, oh, we're going to give half of it to Rita, and then we go to try to take it away from Rita, she's not going to be happy. So, but we're not going to get it, Rita.
I know. I was going to give it a shot, but
All right.
long shot.
All right, 98 is the water company merger, Wisconsin. This has been in for a while, but it's a resubmittal. Same with 99. Same with 99 is really long. That's the Community Housing Bank. 100 is the Affordable Housing Covenants. That's been going on for a while.
Community Housing Bank, we got credit on Boston, the last article. Did we see
Yes.
that?
Thank you, Tucker and Brooke and Ken. Okay, Article 101, this we talked about last week, I think. This would be a conveyance between the town and the land bank for portions of Orange Street and 2 Milestone for the eventual potential expansion of the or improvement of the Milestone Rotary. Article 102, and also 101, I need to double check. There's a bit of syncing up we need to do with this warrant yet, but I think we need a companion real estate article or two to actually do the actual conveying or acquiring. Unless I don't think it's in the home rule petition. I'll talk to you about it later. Okay, 102, this we talked about last week. This would be a home rule petition. This came forward from the water company. They are seeking to acquire a portion of property at 40 Milestone Road for potential well purposes. And they have property off Cliff Road that they would potentially convey to the land bank, and there's some work going on with real estate about that.
I
I thought we were gonna move that to the special in the fall.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, well, we can certainly do that, because it wasn't big or really urgent and we needed to do some more work on it? Is that why?
A little bit more work on it.
Okay. All right, and that has a companion article right there, so those can both go to the special. Okay, this was the home rule petition for the airport capital projects. You already know about that. Candlehouse Lane real estate easement conveyance. I believe Andrew talked with you all about this last week. 105, you know about. This was a recommendation that came forward from the Charter Commission relative to the audit committee, and this is just the article that will affect that. 106 is a citizen. Ignore that little yellow there. 107, 24 Surfside. Oh, 24 Surfside, yes. Yep. And that actually, just so the board knows, with respect to the funding, Brian, we were going to, just remind me how we were doing that. Was that with the additional school appropriation?
It is listed in there as potentially transferring some of the borrowing authorization, but we had a conversation about potentially using real estate.
That's right.
The sale of the proceeds, sale of real estate account.
Yep.
Rather than the borrowing article to do this.
So yeah. So I think if you all are okay with it, there is about $1.2 million-ish in the real estate account.
More than that, but yes.
So, and the number we're talking about is 2 something? 340, thank you very much. So we would propose to take it out of that funding source. So,
yeah.
Yep. Okay, solar, you know about. All of the rest of these real estate, I don't remember if they need work or not with town council, but maybe they've been reviewed. Okay, so these all came forward. You know about these. I think Andrew reviewed all of these with you early on with a map. Article 111, I think we talked to you about. This would authorize the acquisition of some private property needed for drainage purposes in the Bartlett Road Raceway Drive area. 112 relates to, is this the sewer pump station issue on Surfside?
To the fall.
Okay. Industrial land, move to fall, okay. Citizen. Yeah, all that is citizen.
We're way over 100.
And then we got stabilization fund and appropriation of free cash. Ignore that part. So those are the articles. Now we get into the election warrant. So right now we've got number 1, which would be the Island Home override. Number 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the debt exclusions that go with the prior standalone capital articles. Number 6 would be capital outlay exclusions. There are, I think, about 8 or so capital projects that are listed as being subject to funding through capital outlay exclusion, and rather than having all those questions, I tried to consolidate them into a kind of a vehicles and equipment section, which is that chart, and then separately 266 for closed caption television camera assessment of the stormwater drainage system. And John, that's the one you were asking me about. That is not an enterprise fund item. That is general fund. And then the non-binding ballot question, should the Nantucket move to a representative town meeting? I need wording from somebody on that. And I don't know if the government study committee had proposed it, but that question, you mean tomorrow? Okay. Okay, good, because the way it's worded now, should Nantucket move, that was what I initially received, so I just put it in like that, but then I heard that that's not what they want, so I need to get that as soon as possible.
And I would say those look really good. The first 3 or 4 articles are very clear what they are. Sometimes when we have them in legalese and they don't have a heading, and you don't, because you've split these up, I think it's going to be easier for people to understand.
Yeah, okay, good. So that is where we are. And again, the numbering has to be sorted out, and we've got some other formatting to do, but I don't think, did you have one extra article, Brian? You did? Okay, so today was, this week has been very busy, so I didn't get that yet. So maybe you can send that to Erica tomorrow morning and she can get it to me. But can you briefly tell what it was? Because I don't think it was anything overly controversial, just more of a housekeeping thing.
It relates to actually to the sewer force main failure. We received about $890,000 in sewer reimbursement from the insurance company, and we have a small bond anticipation note that we carried through till May because we need town meeting approval to expend insurance proceeds that we receive in excess of $150,000. So the article would just authorize us to expend from that insurance proceeds account to pay the band down.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I did not get to that yet, so I will do that. So I think we're heading in a good direction to have a final document for you for next Wednesday. And it's out for review and comment to a variety of internal people to make sure we have everything solidly done.
Okay.
The only other question I had is so we can comment in March after we get some more information. We can add comments to it?
Yep.
Can we change the order of it?
No.
No.
Not
So
by
that's
March.
all right. So to think about between
Wednesday.
now and then, is there any order? I saw a couple at the end that maybe should go earlier. So we should just
Yeah,
while there
so
are people.
think about that
Yeah.
in the next couple of days.
So with regard to the order, what I try to do is, group like articles together. As you can see, zoning is grouped together, general bylaws are grouped together, home rule petitions, et cetera. And sometimes there are articles that just need to be together and they're not the same category. And I usually have planning take a look at zoning to make sure it's ordered properly so that, we don't get to something where if we do this, then we can't do this other thing that's later on. Same with the general bylaw amendments. So definitely, if you all see something that you think should be reordered, we should discuss it because sometimes it doesn't really work that way. But sometimes it's fine to do it. I just like to try to have people get in the mindset that that there's groupings, so they're not all over the place. Because it's easier later when we're all done, when you have to go back and look things up that they're grouped together. Also, I think there was a bit of discussion about this last week, I think, and this may come up at FinCom in the next few days. But Brian, do you have that tax rate sheet, Erica, that we can project? Do you want to take us quickly through that tax rate sheet? We have had finance develop a tax rate impact sheet for the debt exclusions and the capital exclusions.
Yeah.
Just so you all can take a look at it.
Wow.
That's
Really,
gonna be- yeah.
wow. Didn't realize it was so tiny.
If you print it smaller, does it mean it costs less?
No, unfortunately, I don't think so. So as we normally do for debt exclusions and capital exclusions, we listed the 5 of them that are there, the first being the capital exclusion, the rest being the debt exclusions. The $1,162,000 for the capital exclusion would add about 5 cents if it were to all pass to the tax rate. Newtown Road, if it were to pass, would add, it would actually be de minimis to the tax rate as it currently stands. Wouldn't even really change the number that much, and it would add about, on the average year-round home, $4.70, the median, $3.92. The $3.3 million for Children's Beach would add just under a penny. Surfside would add roughly the same, being a penny, and Waite and Amelia supplemental at the 3.7 would add a penny to the tax rate. So all told, I think that equals, if you slide over to the right, can you scroll down just a little bit? So on the median, that would be roughly 22.30. It'd be about $100 or roughly thereabouts. That would be added to the tax rate. Just to keep in mind, the capital exclusion is one time. We've been employing that as a way to advance replacement of equipment over the last 3 years. The taxpayers have very graciously supported it. So we propose that again, and these do show what the values are. We've calculated all the way out for Commercial property, as the assessor notes, that's a very rough estimate of what the value is. It's certainly not set in stone. The tax rate increases here do not reflect the actual year-round residential exemption. This is just on the straight numbers being the average residential, the median, and the average year-round residential value. So there's no exemptions calculated into these.
So how many pennies was it when you said?
Some of them, if you slide back to the left,
Yeah,
Newtown Road on a 20-year basis would actually not even change the tax rate by adding just under $85,000.
Oh, there you go. So you got 5 cents, 5.
Yeah. And
6 or 7 cents.
Yeah. And obviously, as we always try to do, if these were to be successful and pass, we try to mitigate the impact by planning the borrowings in a way that makes sense as we're adding them to the tax rate. So this merely shows what it would look like for people if these were on the tax rate as of right this moment today in the bills that were sent out.
So you're talking about a 1.7.
Yeah.
If you divide that.
Yeah.
But if you divide the, 6 cents by $3.50, you're just under 2%.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
I like to look at it that way because a penny doesn't seem like much, but this isn't bad. But sometimes when you do the math, it's 5 or 6%.
True.
And it is a lot, and so it's good to look at it.
Well,
both ways.
trying to be cognizant of the big other question that we have. I didn't want to. These are projects that are needed and need to be advanced and done. So that's kind of the way we looked at it when I was making the recommendation.
Yeah, no, I agree with them.
Okay, so more on the town meeting warrant next week when you'll have hopefully a final draft.
Committee reports?
I don't have any.
Do you have anything? Yeah, sure.
So the single-use plastics ban has continued to meet. We're really trying to roll out a lot of public information sessions leading into the June 1st. So we did a couple last summer, and then we've been doing a lot of one-on-one meetings, going to Stop and Shop in Cumberland Farms, the hospital. But we're just trying to get the word out there that Graham is willing to do audits for businesses. So if you're not sure if you're going to be complying as of June 1st, definitely reach out to Graham Durovich, and she can set that up for you. You can also email her any of the products you were thinking about buying, and she can tell you. So we're going to keep working on that. We got some good news on Six Fairgrounds that the appeals favored the town, and so we can move forward with that. I'm speaking correctly. Tucker's shaking his head yes. So we missed this round of funding, but hopefully in the fall we can apply for funding and maybe even extend our safe harbor. So that's really good news. And then just with the opening on Monday being MLK Junior Day, the Interfaith Council has an event at Summer Street Church at 6 p.m. and there's children's events there.
Coastal Resiliency met, and we're meeting again next week. We go every other week, but we're meeting. We reviewed the RFP that's going out. They had some questions. We're going to finalize that review next week. There was some discussion of how does the Coastal Resiliency, how is that inserted into sort of the town's thinking and private people's thinking now, because the plan won't probably be done for 2 years, and there's some issues now that we should really be thinking about, and so how do we do that? We don't have an answer yet. There may be a recommendation coming to us at some point. And one of the interesting things is some of it, there's a cumulative impact, and we've seen, that's the fancy name for what we've been seeing down at Brant Point, where over time it was, that we had plenty of percolation and things worked and we had swales, and as we've changed what's happening down there, as we put in more hardscape, there's less, now things don't work quite as well as they used to, and that's going to increasingly get difficult. And so, we have to have some thinking around how do we address cumulative impact. We're going to, I think there's a little bit of discussion. We're going to look at the article Rick Atherton put forward, which I think might be an important article, and we're going to discuss that next week. The number that we're thinking about, I asked National Grid earlier, what is the number they're using, and they showed us the sheet and a bunch of different numbers. And I think we're probably going to be in the by 2100, I think we're probably going to be in the 9-foot range. We're not going to use 11 or 12, which were some of the high numbers, but it's substantial. And I think, that you're better off planning for that and not having to implement some of those things 30, 40 years out than planning for a low number and starting all over again 10 or 20 years from now. So that was one of the discussions that's going to be informed by the coastal resilience and plan and everything else. We're going to look at it in sort of 10 years, 30 years, 70 years, 80 years. It's going to be, you're going to look at it, I think, 3 different time frames. That's how the RFP is broken out. So those are just some of the things on that. Sort of not a committee report, but just a general observation is driving around. There have been some horrific, quote unquote, rehabilitations that have gone on around downtown this winter. Houses completely torn down, and they tacked back up 5 or 6 pieces of old siding. And I just think that it's incomprehensible to me how you would take 250-year-old buildings, throw them away, and think, or put 2 sides up and think that that's a rehabilitation. It's, if you want to do that, I would hope that people wouldn't buy the historic homes to begin with. It's just, I just don't understand it. We've got an article at town meeting that might help us with that, which I hope we can write a comment on support, because we're losing our heritage, we're losing our soul, and every time one of those happens, we lose a little bit more of our history, and it's just unfortunate that we can't do anything about it. The other comment, Cabot Lane and Nantucket Ave are up on Cliff Road on the right, 2 little side streets, and they have been getting their sewer work done. And both roads are completely torn up, and we're doing a lot of good work there. The end of it, sort of the northern end of it overlooking the harbor kind of, those houses have all buried on their own dime, had already buried all their wires and things. And there are no poles. When you turn around the corner, there are no poles at the very end. There are 3 poles, or maybe 4 on one street, 3 on the other. It would have been an ideal time, and I think all those neighbors would have gladly bettered it to have those 7 poles put into the ground, and it would have been the ideal time to do it because the roads are all torn up and all the utilities, you're talking, the houses are a couple feet away from where the poles are. It would have been an ideal time to do it. It would have not cost very much money. They would have paid for it. And I just think it's a lost opportunity. And we're talking this earlier today about large projects and how do we get the big things in the ground. I think we might do it, sort of one bite at a time. And this would have been a great opportunity. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened. It won't happen. But it's a lost opportunity. And I would like to think that we're thinking about that a little more. Because if we knock off the little side streets and eventually they're done, it just slowly, to do it again now, we'd have to dig up the whole road again and everything else. I just think it's an important part that we should be putting a little more attention to. And that's it.
The senior center had another meeting with the architect here, and it's a lot of information reviewing the different sites, the potential renovation of Folger Farm or a new build either on Sherburne Commons or in another location. We are going to reconvene, and I'm hoping that we'll have a focus on discussing sort of our must-haves into the center, because the price tag is quite significant. And I think that we need to just really figure out what we definitively need before it comes to this board to move forward. But we're shooting for the fall town meeting, but hopefully to have a report to this board before this town meeting. Hopefully within a month or so. Okay, that was early for committee reports, but that's how it was put out. Town manager's report.
Okay, DPW is going to give a water projects update, a brief one.
Good evening. Rob McNeil, DPW. touching on a few active projects. We have Children's Beach Pump Station, working on some temporary measures to have in place below grade for summer. We're also working through some permanent solutions, which include a watershed analysis and ultimately a model that will drive the redesign. Within the Children's Beach watershed also includes Lily Pond and the sites around it, North Liberty, Westchester, West Co, Lily Street. Land Bank is a partner there, and we are working together to take a look at the heart and soul of Lily Pond, which is basically a massive drain installed back in the 20s that's really not working any longer. Taking a look at trying to replace that, as well as updating some of the vicinity, including North Liberty Street, and supporting drainage that has been cut off through some of the development that has recently occurred on Cliff Road, to tie that together and get it down North Liberty Street. So we eliminate puddles that have been created from development on Cliff Road. Jumping down to Washington Francis, obviously we have some work to do there in the immediate future, but design is underway for reconfiguration now that the NISDA property is in the past, and we're trying to flatten the curve through there for truck movements. So those efforts continue. Consu Springs, water quality improvements, basically is a reboot of the original plan. Again, we're partnering with Land Bank on that, and we just recently received the revised existing conditions base plan, so the survey's in, and all the utilities are working together to confirm their locations before we move forward with the design efforts. Somerset Raceway and Bartlett. This is in answer to a number of different things going on, but largely some ponding and just poor drainage conditions at the intersections of Somerset and Raceway, and then further down at Raceway and Bartlett. We've incorporated some modifications to the roadway there to flatten the curve at Bartlett and Raceway, and keep the bike path on the Bartlett side, or the side of the road that it's already on Bartlett. I believe it's the east side. Keep it on the east and south side of the road through the intersection, with an eventual tie through to Hummock Pond Road. And working with NERDA to improve the bus station there, the bus stop at the intersection of Somerset and Raceway. Cow Pond is looking ultimately to get paved to provide some drainage improvements there, with a gravity feed down to the old actual cow pond. It would allow for a number of other improvements, which is consistent, uninterrupted bus service. We're talking school buses, which are stored up in the rear of this at the end of cow pond, as well as allow for the water looping of the water system through the access way through the Newtown Cemetery out to Sparks Avenue, again, to provide improved flow for the water company.
Just quick comment. You know, it's interesting. The places you're talking about, Cow Pond and Lily Street, et cetera, those are all in the storm pathways. You know, when you look at, you know, those were all low areas where it used to go from Maya Comet all the way to the harbor. And, you know, when we get, it's just interesting. They've been interrupted. That's what I talked about earlier. They've been interrupted, and now we're trying to fix them.
Jumping down to stormwater bylaws. So the stormwater bylaw was sent back with some comments from town council. Going through those now, and you'll see that for town meeting. And then all the way down to Lover's Lane, Orco Montahasset. As you may remember, design monies for that project have allowed us to continue with working on the design. And the Lover's Lane capital that you'll see at town meeting is for the phase one construction of that entire effort. Lover's Lane was chosen first because of its severe drainage issues and the fact that it's currently unpaved. So a combination of the drainage improvements as well as the surface improvements will allow Lover's Lane to function as a detour route when Okowa and Montahansett is ultimately constructed or reconstructed.
Is that going to include fixing the paved portion of Lovers?
It would be Lovers from end to end.
Right up to Boulevard?
Yes.
Okay.
And it will also include introduce a bike path as well. And then lastly, the Easy Street bulkhead. There's some actions being taken by the town admin office through the special projects group to address some concerns with the bulkheads, duct bills. Take a look at an alternative there to ensure that they are functioning. But the bulkhead itself has multiple discharges. And they tie back to larger systems that extend, in some cases, all the way up to the top of, near the top of Main Street. So these are not simple solutions. And anyway, that's just part of what we're looking at. There's a lot of other things, obviously, that are on this list, and probably some smaller situations that we're dealing with that don't make it to this level of improvement, but we're working through quite a few drainage-related issues, among other things out there. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lots of stuff going on.
I lost my opportunity to mention that, but I'll just quickly say no. So the Children's Beach Pump Station, maybe Rob, I know he mentioned it, but the idea is to get a temporary fix in there before summer so that the pipe can be buried or not as visible, and so that the structure itself can be a little less visible. Okay. 2021 capital project funding recommendation. So the capital program committee is working to finalize its report, and we have scheduled on the schedule right now for your meeting on January 29th is for Capcom to come to your meeting with FinCom invited to review their final report. In the meantime, though, they have some draft recommendations as to which projects would be funded, and Brian has worked through to identify the funding sources. You have seen some of this in the most recent prior reviews of capital projects. Now, what I don't think is on here, or maybe, Brian, it is on here, is what, I guess maybe it is on here, the items that were submitted but are not being recommended for funding. Are those on here or
Those are not. Those would be in the Capcom's report that they actually
Okay.
do. This is only what I know that they were recommending and the
Okay.
funding sources for those.
So we are getting out to the departments because they haven't seen this report yet or these recommendations. So I should have thought to show what isn't being recommended so that people could see what was submitted in its entirety and what is and isn't being recommended. So this is just only what is being recommended here.
Yes, I mean, a great majority of it was recommended. I think there was 2 vehicles for DPW that didn't rise to the Rory level of ranking. We took off the auxiliary building. I think that we discussed internally about moving that to potentially to a special town meeting in the fall. And then there was, I'm trying to think, a couple other very small things that were not included. It was not very many large things that weren't included.
Was island-wide underground wiring feasibility study?
It is included if you.
But was it recommended by them?
It didn't rise to the level that they would recommend, but we have told them that it's an initiative that we are funding because it's important. And so I think they're okay with it. But it wasn't something that they, when they were doing their rankings, rose to the level of getting funded. But it is included in these funding recommendations.
Okay. So I don't know if you want us to go through project by project, but just to go through here quickly. So there's 3 IT projects. Brian, the Marine Department, I thought that was an additional pump out boat.
Yeah, it is actually. It's not a replacement. It ends up that they're going to procure another one so that they have two, because the other one is being fixed. So replacement needs to be stricken from that.
Okay, so you'll change that?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
really important.
So there's going to be 2 pump out boats. School department has several items there, and you can see the funding sources on the right. We're going to show you total subtotals at the end of this. Town admin has some projects here. We've been struggling to determine how to categorize this, but we've, for now, put, I think, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, hazard mitigation plan projects into town administration.
That's correct.
For now.
We are going to move them into their very own department called hazard mitigation, and we'll, as we progress through other coastal resiliency and whatnot, we'll create separate departments within the software for all of that, so they're very easily identifiable.
We were trying to find a way to show which projects are coming out of the hazard mitigation plan, because they then would really be under different departments, sometimes more than one department. So we've just been kind of going back and forth about how to categorize that. So for now, it's under town admin. We've got these other few things here. The island-wide underground wiring feasibility study, which the board requested, is in here. Police department has sewer connection at Loran Housing. Fire has a couple things. DPW facilities has quite a bit. Some of this is continuing, just general maintenance on various municipal buildings. Not necessarily specific, but will be hopefully done over the next couple of years. I was just going to, then there's Public Works General has some equipment, and the CCTV phase stormwater system evaluation, which is an ongoing project. Then we've got transportation improvements all listed there. You've seen some of these, and some of these are in the warrant already as standalone articles. Solid waste has a couple of projects, and then we've got totals here. So we have so the total amount of the general fund items is 21 million, and then it's broken down here. So the real estate sales appropriation, the article we just talked about putting in there, isn't in here because it's not a capital article, and we're not funding any other capital from that funding source. And then we've got one reappropriation. As you can see, free cash is about half used up from capital, with a total certified free cash of about 10.3 million. Capital from the operating budget is about $1 million. And then the capital exclusions, the ambulance reserve has a little bit of borrowing. What's the borrowing again, Brian?
The sidewalk.
The borrowing within the Proposition 2.5 levy limit is the continuation of the sidewalk plan, which is consistent the way we've been funding it for the last couple of years. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then the debt exclusions. I think we might have spelled exclusion wrong. And then we haven't really spent a whole lot of time on enterprise funds, but I think that's the next couple of pages. Airport has a number of projects. Much of that is borrowed but funded through FAA or state and federal sources.
The largest project that the airport has is an AIP project, which is related to security updates and upgrades within the airport footprint itself. The majority of that $6 million will actually be funded by either state, federal grant, and then a state portion from the Mass Aeronautics Division, and then there'll be a small portion that the airport would be responsible for out of that. I think that the exact percentage split right now isn't known because there's so many varying components to that, and how the FAA funds certain components that the airport's still working through what the ultimate percentage will look like. But the way that we would authorize it at town meeting is consistent the way that we've done it. We authorize the amount, and then when they get the grants, we use that to pay down the bands.
It always amazes me how much money they get from outside. Like, where does the FAA get it? It's 6 million here and 10 million there. It's always amazing.
Wanacomon has a project, and then sewer has a number of projects. So there we have it. This is a little draft-ish, but it's probably for the most part what will end up going forward. We also wanted to show you a bit of an update as to the free cash recommendation. That's a separate slide. Okay, so as we just mentioned, the certified cash, free cash for the general fund is about 10.3 million, and you've seen almost all of this except for what's crossed out here. So the funding school and town capital, I guess that was just getting specific about the number, which we didn't have at the time when we reviewed this with you when we were doing the budget. We've reduced the capital stabilization fund appropriation by a little bit, as well as the town accrued leave reserve. We've added in the Harbor Place consulting, and we've added in the review of the island home model, which we might actually want to, at some point, move that, Brian, into capital.
Okay.
Well, actually, maybe not. Let me think about that.
Okay.
That actually might not really be capital. But we'll have to determine where that's going to go in the warrant. It's not really a standalone article, I don't think, but maybe that would go into sort of an EIR for Island Home.
We could do
with
that.
This as a funding source.
Yep. We could do that.
Okay. So unallocated free cash right now is a little less than what originally we had been estimating, but we do really want to caution that we've added a couple of things in here, about $650,000 worth of things, and adjusted other things, so the impact's not so much. But there are potential issues in this current fiscal year with Island Home and solid waste, so we really need to be disciplined to as best we can about not using any more. I know it's hard.
Is this comparable to last year, using about 6 million in free cash?
I'm not sure. We'd have to we can look at that.
Excuse me. I think we used about a little over 5 million. We didn't last year. We didn't have 10.3 million. We had about 8 million something, and we allocated just about everything but 2 million, and we had held some back for this very same reason last year. But I think we allocated close to 4 to 5 million towards capital. So consistent with what we've had in prior years.
Okay, monthly town management activities report. I'll be very quick about this. We've got a lot of plans, reports, and studies underway. They are all listed right there. We are working to get our consultant who did our sustainability office structure study here at some point, hopefully sometime in January. It's not going to be the 22nd, but January hopefully, or potentially early February. I had hoped that we'd have our sewer master plan ready to present to the board sometime this month, but I communicated with the consultant yesterday, and I think it's going to be more like sometime in February. The Park and Recreation master plan is underway with review by Park and Rec. Lots of meetings about the budget, capital projects, town meeting, collective bargaining negotiations are well underway. Landfill long-term planning meetings are beginning on that. You're going to get an update about that at your February 5th meeting, when you have a pretty comprehensive update about the strategic plan, and that is one of the items in there. Rachel and I attended the Cape Cod Managers meeting last Thursday. That was always interesting topics that come up there. There was some disbelief at the number of citizen warrant articles that we have. There's one town there who said when they have 2, they have a kind of a meltdown. Harbor Place obviously is underway. Lots of projects that are either underway now or in the design phase and are going to be underway. They're pretty well all listed here. The old fire station and the trailer that is there now. Rita had a really great idea for the public explanation about that trailer, but we were going back and forth with the school because there was some talk that they might take it. They have now decided not to take it. So we are working to site it properly at that site. As soon as the old fire station is completely cleaned out and emptied, we were going to put some boat storage in there for the winter, and then we're going to get going with any interior work that needs to be done to move the departments that we discussed moving there, natural resources and health. Lots of things going on with these other projects here. The Community Compact Grant Project, that was our HR policy review and collective bargaining best management practices. We expect to send that report to the board shortly. You all can review it. A lot of the items in there we are already doing, and some of them we can work into our process. Paid parking prep for 2021, you'll get an update on that when we do strategic plan update on February 5th. Lots of other things listed there. Commuter shuttle, you are going to hear about at your meeting. Is it next week? I forget already now. Yeah. You're gonna have a joint meeting with yourselves as the NRTA advisory board and have a discussion about that. PFAS is going to start taking up some time as we go forward. Meeting space is becoming a more consistently difficult issue. Got a couple positions out there that we're working to fill, and those are the highlights.
Okay.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're not gonna make it.